of the Radnor Township Zoning Hearing Board. I invite everyone to join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you. Just a brief announcement because we have a number of items on the agenda this evening, but there could have been more. So what we have done is split what would otherwise have, be all the cases that we're hearing this evening into two hearings, the second of which will be conducted on, is that Monday, November 15th? Yeah. Monday, November 15th, right here. Opposite, probably, again, a football game. I apologize for that, but we'll be hearing a couple cases there. And then I believe later that week we'll be having our regularly scheduled November meeting. So that's out of the way. Let's proceed first with Appeal 3077, the applicant Markier Properties, LLC, property located at Sproul Road and Highfield Road, requesting an extension of time for obtaining a permit under Section 280-144 of the Code for an additional 6 months to May 2, 2022. Mr. Cornelia?
Evening. I'm Nick Cornelia, representing the applicant on this. This was a previous variance that was granted. There was litigation involved. There was actually two pieces of litigation involved. They all have been settled now. We actually have the properties being sold. We have a settlement date of November 1st. And actually a grading permit's already been made with the township, and we're waiting for a decision on that grading permit. So hopefully, this should be resolved relatively quickly.
Okay, are there, I'm sorry, because Mr. Weitzman is not with us this evening, either Ms. Foreman or Mr. John Nagel will be voting on matters coming before the board this evening. Jamie Foreman will be voting on the first matter. Are there any questions from the board for this request? Is there anyone in the public that would like to comment on this request? Please come forward. Step up, Mr. Kravitz. Thank you.
I am the purchaser from the Markier Properties this upcoming, or November 1st. And as they had reiterated to you, everything seems to be in order from your concerns of waiting on a request down the road again for a permit. Everything's in order, and we're ready to move forward with construction.
Are there any questions for Mr. Kravitz? No. Thank you, sir.
Okay.
With that out of the way, is there any other public comment? Seeing none, I would move that the request for the extension to May 2nd, 2022 be granted. Is there a second? Second by Mr. Lord. Any board discussion? Hearing none, I'll call the vote. Ms. Foreman? Aye. Mr. Lord? Aye. Mr. George Nagel?
Aye.
Mr. DeLizia? Aye. And I'm also in favor. It's 5-0. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hopefully, this is it. Yeah. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, one other extension request came in just under the wire. This is appeal number 3092. Actually, Mr. Brosman, yeah, okay. Appeal number 3092, 820 Lawrence Lane. Mr. Brosman?
Good evening. I'm George Brosman. I represented Paul Cordero and Jennifer Unterberger, who own the property at 820 Lawrence Lane. In Appeal 3092, the zoning board granted certain relief to disturb steep slopes. My clients were going to tear down a dilapidated home and build their new home there. And they got all of their building permits for the home. They demolished the dilapidated structure. They're well underway with construction. I sent you copies of all the permits they had. The reason I sent in the letter, and I'm here tonight. In the back of the house, shown on the plans that you approved was a pool and some related improvements. Since that will require a separate building permit, we wanted to make sure that there wasn't an issue when they came for the pool improvements permit, that the 6-month period had expired. So this is why we're seeking the extension so they can get the pool permit. They do intend to move forward with that. They didn't move forward with it because, you know, the site was taken up by the house construction, and now it's time to go forward with the pool. So they're asking for a 6-month extension to obtain the permit for the pool improvements.
And Mr. Brosman, that extension will take us out to what date?
May, June, July, August, September, October. I believe it'll be April
I
1
did not
of
promise no math. Sorry, George.
April 1 of 2022, if I counted on my fingers correctly.
Okay, April 1, 2022. Are there any questions from the board on this request? Any comments from the public? Seeing none, I will move that we grant the request for the extension until April 1st, 2022. Is there a second? Second. Any board discussion? No board discussion. We'll call the vote. Mr. John Nagel? Aye. Mr. Lord? Aye. Mr. George Nagel? Aye. Mr. DeLizia? Aye. And I'm also voting in favor. That's 5-0. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
April 1st, 2022 is the extension. Thank you. Okay, we're going to jump slightly out of order now. We're going to call Appeal 3108. Mr. Petroza, this will be you. The applicant, Wayne Center LP, property located at 216 East Lancaster Avenue, zoned WBOD, Wayne Business Overlay District. The application requests a special exception pursuant to Section 280-101A1 to change a non-conforming use to another non-conforming use. Good evening, Mr. Petroza. What do you have for us?
This is the Wayne Center LP, the owner of the property at 216 East Lancaster Avenue, which is the former Berkshire Hathaway property between Starbucks and TD Bank on West Wayne Avenue. We were here a little more than a year ago, I think it was September of 2020, on a request for a special exception to change from the office that was formerly occupied by Berkshire Hathaway to an office for plastic surgeons. And unfortunately, we were approved, but unfortunately that deal fell through. Just for the board's information, in case anybody's interested, it had to do primarily with the reimbursements they were getting from insurance. And so they were not going to get what they thought they were going to get, and they didn't go through with the deal. So my client, Mr. Ashkenazi, has continued to try to lease the property for office use. And what is proposed now is a real estate office, an office for real estate company, which the property historically was. And so I won't belabor all the prior use, but I'd like to just give a little outline for anybody who may not have been here the last time we were here. From late 1999, early 2000 until 2020, I think it was February 28, 2020, the property was leased by Fox and Roach LP and was used as a real estate office, which used the trade name Prudential Fox and Roach, initially and later Berkshire Hathaway Home Services, Fox and Roach Realtors. I'll just refer to it as Berkshire Hathaway. The property is improved with a 9,390 square foot building, a 38-car parking lot, landscaping, and related improvements, and was all of which was developed for the real estate office in 1999-2000. At the time the office was established in 2000, it was zoned C2. And under the C2 neighborhood commercial, a small portion in the rear is R3. The real estate office, an office use was, actually the ordinance doesn't distinguish between real estate offices and other offices, just an office use was a permitted use. So the use was established. And then the township enacted the Wayne Business Overlay District amendment to the zoning map and zoning ordinance on July 16, 2007. And Under that ordinance, an office use is only allowed on the second floor when there's retail or other uses on the first floor. So in that sense, it made the use non-conforming. And on July 16, 2007. And as I'm sure the board knows, Section 280-101A1 of the zoning ordinance provides that a non-conforming use may be changed to another by grant of special exception only upon determination by the zoning hearing board after public hearing that the proposed new use will be no more detrimental to its neighborhood and surroundings than is the use being replaced. Although the proposed use, which is a real estate office, is actually the exact same use that took place previously, the ordinance indicates that it's sort of an unusual provision, any change in non-residential occupancy is considered to be a change of use for purposes of this section. So it looks a little odd to say we're coming in from a real estate office to want to change to a real estate office, but that's what the ordinance says. It's the only place I've ever actually seen that provision. But anyhow, it was Berkshire Hathaway. It's proposed to be a Compass real estate office now. Compass, C-O-M-P-A-S-S. The Compass real estate office will be no more detrimental to the neighborhood and surroundings than the prior Berkshire Hathaway office. If anything, less is actually done by Compass there. They're very into high tech, and probably will be fewer people there and less intensive use. And we have a witness, he'll testify to that. I'm just going to call two witnesses. My first is Paul Ashkenazi, who's the owner's representative. Wayne Center LP is a limited partnership. Its general partner is Wayne Tack LLC. Paul is the member of Wayne Tack LLC. But I just have him briefly testify about the existing improvements, the prior use of the property, and his efforts to lease the property for office use. He has continued to attempt to lease it for office use. And my second witness is the sales manager for the local Compass real estate office, which is located in Devon, Terry Kirkwood, and she'll describe the proposed use and indicate that it'd be no more detrimental.
Here's a mic for the witness. Sure. Norma, if you would.
All right.
Paul Ashkenazi, A-S-C-H-K-E-N-A-S-Y.
And thank you for taking us out of order. He has a flight this evening at 8:55. So. With the board's permission, I may lead him just a little bit because you've sort of heard this testimony previously. Paul, just indicate your name and business address.
Paul Ashkenazi, Blank Ashkenazi Properties, 925 West Lancaster Avenue, Bryn Mawr, PA 19010.
And you're familiar with Wayne Center LP, the applicant in this zoning application?
I am.
And it's a Pennsylvania limited partnership, is that correct?
It is.
And the general partner is Wayne Tack LLC?
It is.
And what is your position with Wayne Tack LLC?
I'm the managing member. I'm the sole member.
All right. And you're familiar with the property 216 East Lancaster Avenue, Wayne, PA, which is the subject of this evening's zoning application?
I am.
And the owner of the property is Wayne Center LP?
Yes.
And we've included in our exhibits the deed, Exhibit A1, and we've provided all these exhibits with the application of the board. That's the deed for the property?
It is.
All right. And that indicates that the deed was dated January 16, 2014. But as you testified at the previous hearing, your family, the Blank family, has owned this property for many, many years.
Correct. Since 1999, approximately.
And you're familiar with the subject property and the history of the property?
I am.
And A2 is a survey of the property?
Yes, it is.
And that was prepared by Control Point Associates dated December 6, 2013, correct?
Yes.
Just, if you need to, make use of A2, and just describe the property briefly.
There's an approximately 9,400 square foot building on Lancaster Avenue between the Starbucks and TD Bank. The building is L-shaped. The wider part is in the rear. There's 38 parking spaces that run to the right of the building and wrap around the rear. There's a fence in the back, and there's actually a significant amount of grass behind the fence. That's our property, but is zoned R3, I believe. R3. That we maintain. It would appear to most people that it's the property of the homeowner behind us, but we maintain that. And it's been a real estate office since 1999 or 2000.
Okay. And there are 38 parking spaces?
There are.
And sidewalk, grass areas, landscaping, a trash enclosure, metal shed, all shown on the survey?
Yes.
Okay. We submitted photographs. This time we cut down the number of photographs. It's just A3A through A3D. There are 4 photographs. Can you just take a look at those photographs and indicate what, identify them by exhibit number and what they show?
Sure. So A3A is the view heading west, basically of the sidewall of the building, but really primarily of the Starbucks that's adjacent to us. A3B is a direct shot of the building straight on from Lancaster Avenue, looking straight at the building. A3C is a little further west, just looking back so that you can see the L shape in because the real primary entrance to the building is actually towards the back, so it shows the entrance. And then A3D is a little farther up, looking again, sort of heading west, showing the adjacent TD Bank.
And when was the existing building constructed?
In 1999 and early 2000.
And was it originally constructed for the real estate office?
Yes, it was Fox and Roach at the time.
And at some point, they changed their name to Berkshire Hathaway.
Yes.
And the date of the original lease with Fox and Roach was August 19th, 1999.
It was.
And did the real estate office continue to operate at 216 East Lancaster Avenue from late 1999, early 2000, until they closed the office last year, I believe February 28th, 2020?
Yes.
And please describe briefly the operation of the real estate office when it was there, the Berkshire Hathaway real estate office.
I mean, it varied at different times, but for the last 5 or 6 years, it was open 7 days a week, 9 to 5 during the week, and they were open from 10 to 3 or 10 to 4 on Saturday and Sunday. Obviously, depending on closings, and people were in, but they were open 7 days a week.
And the number of employees at the peak?
About 80 to 90.
Okay. And that was were real estate settlements or closings taking place there?
Yes, they had title and mortgage
Mortgage
insurance, and mortgage and insurance as part of that, but they were a real estate office.
And there were regular office or staff meetings with fairly large numbers of people
they
attending?
had monthly meetings where 80 or 90 people would show up at the peak.
Okay. And there's a single point of access to and from Lancaster Avenue, is that correct?
That is correct.
And did that access function satisfactorily when the real estate office was in operation?
It did.
And the property is served by public water and sewer, is it not?
It is.
And is the parking lot adequately illuminated?
It is.
Do you believe the proposed use as an office for Compass Real Estate will be no more detrimental to the neighborhood and surroundings than the former Berkshire Hathaway real estate office?
I do. I believe it's actually, I believe, given the technology that Compass uses, they actually have less people in the office at a time, so probably less traffic.
Just one last area I'd like to cover with your testimony. Since the Berkshire Hathaway office closed February 28th, 2020, have you tried continuously to lease the property for office use?
I have. As I was before you about a year ago, we worked for a long time on an office for a plastic surgeon, which unfortunately began to fall apart earlier this year. We spoke, and basically starting in January or so of this year, we started talking to Compass about this, taking a long time to get here. In fact, we even talked to Berkshire Hathaway again. They came back to us over the summer about coming back and taking part of the building. So we've really only talked to office tenants about the building.
And why was it that you only talked to office tenants about the building?
There's a lot of empty retail space, and they really, I mean, no one has shown interest in the retail space. It's not really, it was built as an office building. It was built as a real estate office. It's really not, it's not in the core of Wayne that way. Most of the building's set back. There's very little frontage and visibility, so it just doesn't really work for retail very well.
And there are a lot of offices inside the building?
Yes, and it's built out as office space. While they are going to sort of gut it cosmetically, the layout is the same. It works out very well for them.
Have you always continued to try to find an office tenant for this property?
Yes, it's clearly
That's all I have.
Only viable, or almost only viable use.
No change in the footprint of the property?
No.
Might be some exterior cleanup or
Correct. We're going to
refurbishment.
we're going to change some of the materials on the facade, which obviously we'd get a permit for, and we're going to upgrade it, make it, it is 20 years old, so we're going to update the facade, but that's all materials. The footprint doesn't change an inch.
Questions from the board for this witness? No, thank you.
Thank you. One more witness, Terry Kirkwood.
Please.
I do. Yes, Terry, Terry, Kirkwood. Okay. Can you hear me now?
Terry, what is your business address?
My business address is 80 West Lancaster Avenue, Suite 310, Devon, PA 19333.
And by whom are you employed?
Compass Real Estate.
In what capacity?
I'm a sales manager in the Devon office.
Okay. Where is the, well, you just told us where the office was located. What are the proposed days and hours of operation at the proposed Compass Real Estate office at 216 East Lancaster Avenue?
So very similar to the prior use, likely 7 days a week, because real estate is 7 days a week of a job, but it will only be staffed 5 days a week. And the Saturday and Sunday will just be for agents coming in, potentially meeting clients.
Okay, and how about the typical hours of operation?
9 to 5, Monday through Friday, and then again, some agents will meet clients after hours, and then Saturday and Sunday, it could be anywhere from 9 o'clock to 4 o'clock, and then even later.
Okay. How many, well, if I say employees, how many people that actually are employed by Compass Real Estate would you anticipate to be at this
So
office?
employees in the new office would be likely about 5.
Okay. And the agents, though, they're independent contractors, is that?
Correct.
And how many agents would you expect to be, what's the greatest number of agents you would anticipate being there on any particular occasion?
Well, on any particular day, I would say anywhere from, it could be as little as 10, and it could be as many as 50, 60.
Okay. And the 50, 60 would be if there was some kind of big sales meeting or?
It could be. Most of our sales meetings are all done via Zoom right now, so we're doing them all remotely. So to give you an example, we had a sales meeting yesterday, and there were 414 people because it was a regional meeting. It was all online. And then our local sales meeting, there was 50 people online.
Okay. This won't be Compass's biggest office in this area, will
Not
it?
by a long shot.
Where is is there a bigger office you can
So
name?
we have a office in Ardmore, right in Suburban Square, and that office is probably approximately 20,000 square feet. And we are about to go into our Locust Street office in Philadelphia, and I don't know what the square footage of that one's going to be, but I understand it's a couple floors.
Okay. In your own words, could you please just describe the proposed use? What types of activities would be taking place here?
So typical real estate, there'll be real estate closings that are going to be held there. There'll be agents that are meeting their clients there. There'll be team meetings that will go on there. We may have a mortgage company in there at one point, maybe a title company in at one point, so then they would be there meeting with the agents as well.
And closings would take place there?
Closings would take place there.
Right. And is there anything about Compass that steers it more towards technology than some of the other real estate companies that you're familiar with?
Well, we tend to just do things a little bit more remotely, so we don't have in-person meetings as much. They're all done remotely, so I feel like it's less use in the office. Even when I go into our 20,000 square foot Ardmore office, when I go in there, I can see as many as 5 people and, I think as many as 30 at a time. So it's not a high-use office right now in this environment with all the technology that we have for our clients.
Do you believe the proposed Compass office will be any more detrimental to the surrounding area than the Berkshire Hathaway office was?
No, I think it's going to be less.
In the real estate business generally, a lot more is done technologically these days than it used to be back in the heyday, 2010, when everything was done in person.
Correct. You know, there's no more, unfortunately, meeting clients and signing documents. Now everything's signed electronically, so everything just gets done via email. And
Is there anything you would like to add?
I think the only thing I would like to add is, you know, I personally would look forward to getting back into Wayne and being part of the community and being able to walk down the street and eat at the restaurants and shop at the stores that are there. And, you know, I think it's always a good place. We do a lot of relocation work, so even bringing relocation clients into the area and being able to show off this beautiful town and just being right there would be great.
Great. Does Compass take place in a lot of community activities? And
Yes, we're very involved philanthropically through our Compass Cares.
that's all I have.
The intention is to take all the square footage in the property?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Any board questions for this witness? Okay, thank you. Anything else, Mr. Petrosa?
No, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Just move for the admission of the exhibits. That's all.
Without objection. Any comment from the public on this application? Okay, seeing none, I will move that the request for a special exception under, to permit the non-conforming use, replacing another non-conforming use under 280-101A1 be granted. Is there a second? Second. Any board discussion? Okay, hearing none, I'll call the vote. Ms. Foreman?
Aye.
Mr. Lord? Aye. Mr. John Nagel, or George Nagel, sorry. I knew I'd screw it up.
Aye.
Mr. DeLizia? And I'm also in favor. That's 5-0. Good luck with the project. Good to see you. Good
Thank
to
you
see
very much.
And Mr. Petrosa, thank you very much.
Thanks. Thank you, Nick.
It's gonna be.
Oh, sorry.
No respect around here. Okay, moving on to appeal number 3107. The applicant, Sarah Mann, property located at 459 Sproul Road, zoned R1 residential. The property is surrounded by commercial and other non-residential uses, as well as Interstate 476. Pursuant to a variance from the Zoning Hearing Board in 2008, the property is currently used as a Montessori school. The applicant proposes to use the building as chiropractic offices. The applicant requests a variance from Section 280-14 of the code to convert the convert the use of the property to chiropractic offices, or a special exception under 280-101A1 for a conversion from one non-conforming use to another non-conforming use. Applicant also requests such relief consistent with the exhibits and testimony presented at the zoning hearing. Mr. Cornelia, good evening.
Thank you. Good evening. Nick Cornelia, representing the applicant. I have 3 additional exhibits that I will hand up. I've already pre-marked them, A14, A15, A16. These are in addition to the exhibits you should have already. This property is located next to Conestoga Swim Club. So if you're going down Conestoga Road, heading east and make the right on Sproul, it's on the left-hand side. You recall that as you make that right on Sproul, the first property kind of still owned by PennDOT. Then you have this property. Then you have Conestoga Swim Club. Then you have Radnor Valley Country Club, Across the street from this site is the Radnor Friends Church, which is right there on the corner, and then further across the street, across Sproul Road, are some residential neighborhood. It backs immediately up to the Blue Route. Back in 2008, the applicant, Mainline Montessori School, came in and requested relief to change it from a residential use to the Montessori school use. That relief was granted, a variance was granted. Pam High, who's the owner of the Montessori school, is here this evening. She's the owner of the property as well. She intends to sell it, if this is approved, to Sarah Mann and 2 other individuals who's present here also. And what they intend to use it for chiropractic offices and for kind of a wellness center associated with the chiropractic offices. So the first witnesses I would have would be Pam, who's the owner of the property.
And if you'll raise your right hand, please, you do solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
I do.
State your full name and spell it for me, please.
Pamela Haig, Haigh.
Pam, you are the owner of the property located at 459 Sproul Road.
Yes,
And you acquired it in 2008, and I've marked this as A2, which is a copy of
Yes.
the deed
Yeah.
indicating you acquired it, and you acquired it in your own name.
Yes.
Prior to you acquiring it, it was a residence,
yes.
and do you recall, the difficulty that person had in attempting to have a residential use there?
Yeah, I mean, she was having difficulty selling it as a residential unit.
Okay, you have now entered into an agreement of sale with Sarah and 2 other individuals?
Yes,
Since you acquired the property, has it been used as Mainline Montessori School?
yes,
And how long have you been associated with Mainline Montessori School?
since 1988, 33 years.
Okay. And actually, you're moving across the street, aren't you? You're
Hopefully.
Yeah, hopefully, the Radnor Friends?
Not
Yeah.
sure where we're going yet.
Okay. As I mentioned, we have an agreement of sale, and I've marked that as A3, correct?
Yes.
And that's the agreement of sale on the property?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Does Ms. Mann have your permission to proceed with this hearing here this evening?
Yes.
Prior to you using the property, you had to make application before the zoning hearing board, is that right?
Yes,
And that application and the order granting the approval, that was back in 2008, and is A6, the application?
yes. Mm-hmm.
The application, or I should say, the decision was in the hearing board. And that decision concluded on page 3 that the subject premises is almost entirely surrounded by properties being operated for commercial or other non-residential uses, and the proximity of the Blue Route all combined create a severe unnecessary hardship which has not been created by the appellant. I mean, that's how it reads.
Yes.
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
And the issue was you were granted relief for the Montessori school,
Right,
correct? So we're here this evening because we're changing that use
right.
to a different use, right? Okay. I'm going to show you the aerial photo of the property, and you heard what I testified to regarding, or what I stated in opening regarding the surrounding area. And if you look at A5, obviously that large highway is the Blue Route, correct? It says 476?
Yes, mm-hmm.
And then at the bottom, actually labeled Mainline Montessori. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. And then right next to you is Conestoga Swim Club.
Exactly.
All right. And then to the left of your property, which would be to the north, is other property that's actually owned by PennDOT.
Yes,
And then further going south on Sproul Road is the Radnor Valley Country Club.
yes. Mm-hmm.
And then on the corner of Sproul and Conestoga is the Radnor Friends Church.
Yes.
Now, is this kind of an isolated property, would you say?
Yeah, it's really isolated.
Okay. And also, isn't basically the entire property in the floodplain. And there have been some water issues on the property.
Yes.
Also, actually, you're not on public water. You're on well water there?
Yes.
And have you operated the Montessori school in that location since you acquired it? Showing you some photos, this has an appearance of a residence, correct? It has appearance of
Yes.
a residence? Looking at A9?
Children's house.
Yeah. A9, right?
Yes.
Okay, and that's the front of the property?
Yes.
And then A10 also, the front of the property? And A11 is the driveway coming in from Sproul Road?
Yes.
Then A12, that's the rear of the property?
Yeah.
And you have not put any additions on this property?
No.
You did change the entrance, is that correct, how you enter the property?
Yes.
And we actually have a survey that you have, it's 814, that we'll introduce when Ms. Mann comes up and testifies to. And actually that, you needed relief to change that driveway, and you were granted that relief by Exhibit A13, which is appeal number 2815.
Yes.
Is the square footage of the house 3,640? Would that be accurate?
Yes.
And it's 2 stories?
Yes.
And it looks like it would be kind of a split level type?
Yeah.
That would be accurate
Yes.
description of it? What are your current hours of operation for the school?
8 to 3. 8 to 3. 8 o'clock. 8 o'clock to 3. 8 to 3.
And when's your general drop-off for the children?
Well, some people come at 8, some parents come at 8, some come at 8:50.
And so
And then
they're
again at
okay.
11:20 and pickup. And
But pretty much you're dropping off at, during
rush
peak
hour.
hours, rush
Yes,
hours,
yes,
okay.
yeah.
And when you opened, Mainline Montessori had 54 students?
Yes.
And actually, I believe the testimony you gave at that time was you wished to expand it to 60 students?
Yes.
Now, currently, you don't have that many students. Currently, you don't have that many students, correct?
No.
And the reason, COVID-related
Yes,
issues?
yeah.
Well, how
By
is that?
choice, yeah.
Yeah, okay. How many teachers and staff did you have initially? Was it approximately 7, did you say?
7, yes.
This has no sidewalks, this property?
No,
And it's a pretty busy street?
very.
Does it have a basement?
No,
It's on slab?
yes.
Yeah. Is there any noise from the Blue Route that you see, that you hear?
I mean, we're outside with the children, I don't notice it, but when I'm not there, I notice
Okay.
it. When the children are there.
Right. And you've been attempting to sell this, what, since the beginning of the year, approximately?
April, since
Okay.
April.
And you've had some inquiries? Would that be accurate?
Yes,
All right.
yes,
And they've all fallen through?
yes,
All right.
backed out.
Yeah. Do you know why they backed out?
The first school was afraid to come here. Too many changes, I believe.
Because
and-
they wanted to put an addition on. You actually had
Yeah,
a
they wanted
school
to add, like, make more changes. And then the second one was the residential,
And,
and they pulled out as well. I think over the housing, all the changes they would have to make, and
okay.
maybe the water.
And also the water as
issues.
well,
Yeah.
water issues. That's all I have for Pam.
Any questions from the board for this witness?
The new use, how many practitioners will be there?
Yeah. Well, John, I'll have Sarah testify to that.
Oh, okay.
I'll have another witness, is the actual buyer of the property.
I'm sorry, any other questions for the prior witness? Okay, thanks.
I'm sorry, John, to pass it on.
Hi.
Okay.
Yes. Sarah Mann, M-A-N-N,
And
S-A-R-A-H, with an H.
and Sarah, you've entered into an agreement of sale for the purchase of this property,
Yes,
and that's A3?
yes,
Okay. And there's a couple other individuals included as buyers.
yes.
And can you just tell the board who they are?
One's my ex-husband.
Okay, so you're basically associated with him on this project.
Yes, family.
Okay. Where do you live?
I live right behind the school,
Oh.
on the other side of 476 on Radnor Ave.
I'm sorry.
Radnor Ave,
How far from this site, would you say?
1 mile.
All right.
I Googled that.
And you had a survey done, correct?
Yes.
All right. And I'm going to show you what's been marked as A14. And that is the survey, correct?
Yes.
All right. Now, it shows 14 parking spaces.
Yes.
Would that be sufficient for what your proposed use is?
More than, yes.
Now, I believe we do need relief on the parking, and because the Montessori school had less of a requirement than the, this use as far as parking is concerned. So we do need parking relief. We have Frank Tavani here, a traffic consultant, who will testify as to this is adequate parking for this use. As well, Frank will also testify as to traffic impact as well. But it is part of the relief that will be required. That's consistent with the exhibits and part of the application.
Hold on for a second, Nick. Mr. Solicitor, that has not been advertised, that specific request. And, the usual catch-all at the bottom, I'm not certain is satisfactory. You have any thoughts on that?
Assuming, Nick, that parking relief is going to be somewhere other than section 280-14, right?
Yes. Yeah, it would be, but there is a catch-all that we didn't realize the parking situation until we got the survey. We just got the survey like 2 days ago. And that's why we did have the catch-all in there regarding any other relief consistent with the plans and exhibits made that were part of the record.
I mean, obviously, it's going to be up to the board whether or not this is a material change in the application request. And I would argue that I find it hard to believe that type of addition to the application isn't material.
Well, how many spaces are needed?
Well, again, it depends on, if it's an office use, we needed, this use, if it's an office use, we need 14.62.
6'2".
So basically, if it's an office use, we needed 14.62. So technically, if you go up, we need one space more if it's an office use. If it's considered medical offices, which, there's no definition of medical offices in the code, we would need 19.
All of which are being constructed in a floodplain.
We're not adding any paving. We're not adding any paving at all. They would be constructed in the floodplain if we were adding paving. We're not proposing any additions to the building, any change in the paving, any change at all to this site, except for just general renovations to the building itself.
So where would you put the parking space?
No, we're not adding any additional parking.
There's 14 spaces already.
This plan is existing conditions that shows 14 parking spaces.
Okay. Right. In lieu of building the spaces, you're asking for the variance?
Yes, correct. Because if we built the spaces, they would be in the floodplain. And we would need a variance from that, and much more significant variance, I believe, because it would be in the floodplain. And this property does experience water issues. So in lieu of adding additional parking spaces, the current plan and the Montessori school had 14 parking spaces. We're requesting relief to continue with those 14 parking spaces.
Okay, I think we can continue at this point, and you'll have Mr. Tavani speak to some other issues, I'm sure. Okay, thank you.
Okay. How would you live near Sproul Road, how would you characterize it? It's a busy street?
At certain times, yes.
And you would agree that this site is isolated?
Yes, very.
I mean, people are not going to be parking on the street here.
No,
All
not
right,
at all.
they're going to be parking on site.
You cannot park anywhere near those streets. Yeah, you can't walk on them, can't park on them.
And you saw the photos of the property. Are you intending any additions to the property?
No,
Or are you intending to change any of the paving or impervious coverage of the property?
no.
So you're going to keep everything pretty much the same way as it currently exists.
Correct, just patch and repair things to make them look new.
Now, your proposed use as a chiropractic offices and wellness clinic. Explain what you mean by that.
So chiropractic care includes multidisciplinary care, so you could have massage therapy, acupuncture, PT, so it all falls under that wellness clinic to just have more holistic functioning medicine.
How many chiropractors do you anticipate having on this site?
Guaranteed one and hopefully two.
And would you have, you mentioned the wellness center, would there be another possible type physician?
Functional medicine, so it's a DO, practicing similar disciplinaries, just more of a holistic approach.
And how many staff would you have?
So each doctor would probably have an assistant, so 2 and 2. If there's 3, there'd be 6 people staffed at any given time.
And that's including the chiropractor and...
Right, 3 doctors, 3 assistants
Right.
at max.
And tell the board how the appointments work.
So time slots for each appointment would be 30-minute increments. So each chiro would have, or each doctor would have 1 patient per 30 minutes, so 1 waiting, 1 being treated.
And how about your hours of operation?
They would fluctuate. So early morning, like pre-work hours would typically be when you open, so 7 o'clock first patient. And then those days would probably end around 6 o'clock, but 2 days a week you would have a later start date, so they would start at 11 and go till 7.
Right, so as far as patients are concerned, you would say the max would be 2
Wait,
patients
sorry,
on site?
Fridays you leave at 1.
I'm sorry?
Fridays you would leave at 1.
Okay.
Yes.
And you wouldn't be open on Sundays?
No.
Okay. So the max number of patients you would have would be, for each doctor, would be 2 at any one time?
Correct.
1 waiting and 1 being
Correct.
serviced. So the max number of patients would be 6.
Correct.
You seem to have some knowledge of the business. What knowledge do you have of this business?
I was with my ex-husband during his education, and then after education, he opened a small practice when we lived in St. Louis, and I helped him start that and manage his calendar. Throughout that time, just been very involved because it's a battle of working with a partner who is post-grad school and creating a schedule with him and children. So I've seen that it requires flexibility, which is why this job is such a good job for him, and this practice is a good practice for our family, because it allows us to have flexibility and work.
Do you have children?
Twin 5-year-old boys, yes.
So you're looking forward to him
Yeah.
being able to help with?
He would be 1 minute from my house and 8 minutes from Radnor schools, so it allows us to have about 40 minutes of less commute time, having him pick them up, bring them to his house in Wynwood, and then back to this area when they go to school.
Do you have any knowledge of the real estate business?
I do. I've been a mortgage lender for 17 years, and I work with residential homes. And I see that this property would be very difficult to sell as a residential home.
Thank you. I have nothing further of this witness.
Questions from the board, Mr. John Nagel?
My math is that you would need potentially 12 spaces.
Correct. I mean, that would be max.
Right.
Yeah.
But even with, you would only have 1 practitioner, or 2, you have the DO and then another practitioner, not a masseuse. I mean, it sounds to me like there could be more people there.
So David Mann, the doctor, the chiro, he actually has, I think, 1,000 degrees, one of them which is sports medicine, massage medicine. He has degrees in various fields, including all those, except for PT. I believe the state of Pennsylvania requires a doctor to be on site when you do PT, so he would be able to do the chiropractic version of PT on site. So it is actually covered by all of his licenses and degrees. Could we swap out the second chiro for an actual PT? Yes, it would still be a similar practice, and it wouldn't disturb any of the setup. It would just be actually have somebody that is a licensed doctor in physical therapy, not just DC, Doctor of Chiropractic Medicine.
Right. Okay.
And the functional medicine doctor can really do all of that, really.
Thank you.
Any other board questions?
Yes, I have a couple. I'm unclear here. Your husband is a doctor of, is a chiropractic
medicine.
doctor, is that correct?
DC, yeah.
And you're planning to have a doctor of osteopathy?
So yes, that would be the functional medicine doctor.
And
You
no
don't
other...
have that now, though.
We don't have that now. That's,
Your
you know.
plan, this is your plan I'm referring to?
Right.
And that's it? Or you're going to have, I thought I understood you're going to have 2 chiropractors.
that's the goal. It will be guaranteed one to start. The goal is to have, enough business that we would be able to bring on another DC.
Okay. And did I understand that you would have a maximum of 6 patients there at any time?
Correct. If that's all doctors are present on site, yes.
And the physical, you refer to as PT, but you're referring to physical therapy?
Correct.
And would you have a dedicated physical therapist or a physiatrist?
If it worked out better to have a PT on site than another DC, then we would opt to have a PT join us and not another DC. But we wouldn't have 2 doctors and a PT and a functional medicine doctor. We wouldn't have the space to have all those doctors.
And your role in the day-to-day operations of the facility would be
Business manager.
business manager, you said? Okay, thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry, Jamie, sure.
Sorry. Do you foresee selling items like vitamins or supplements where you would bring in more members of the public than possibly the average patient coming in for adjustments or a traditional doctor appointment?
Nothing that would bring people outside of the patients into the building to sell. There's, supplements like Juice Plus that I'm not sure if they're even allowed to do that on site. I know other chiropractors in the area do offer the Juice Plus supplements, but that would be just for patients that are like part of the practice, not anybody that's not.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you.
Frank? I'm sorry.
I have one more question, I'm sorry. You don't have plans to change the footprint of this building, is that right?
Correct.
Thanks. Okay,
No.
thank you.
I do.
And say your full name, please.
Frank Tavani, Tavani.
Frank, what's your profession?
I am a traffic engineer.
You're a registered professional engineer in Pennsylvania.
I am.
You're also a registered professional traffic operations engineer.
Yes.
And I've marked as A15 your CV and just represent your qualifications. Are you a member of the Institute of Traffic Engineers?
Yes.
And that's what ITE for short?
Correct.
Right. And briefly, your educational background?
I have a Bachelor of Science in Civil Engineering from Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. Sorry. Graduated in 1993. I've been in continuous practice as a traffic engineer since May of that year. I've been continuously licensed since 1999.
What type of experience do you have as far as preparing reports and testifying?
That's all I've been doing since 1993, including in this township. Including in this township. You're welcome.
And you've been qualified, actually before this township, as an expert in traffic engineering?
Yes.
As well as numerous other townships?
Yes.
I request to be qualified as an expert in traffic engineering, please.
Without objection.
Thank you.
Did you perform a traffic engineering investigation for the proposed conversion of the existing Montessori school and the proposed use that's being proposed here this evening?
Yes.
And did you prepare a report for that?
I did.
And that report has been marked as A16?
Yes.
And we've handed that up?
I believe you did.
All right. And did you perform an analysis of the trip generation comparing the two uses?
A number of analyses, including that, yes.
And how did you determine the trip generation?
I referred to a widely accepted publication by the ITE outfit you mentioned earlier, called the Trip Generation Manual.
Is that the standard in the industry?
Yes, absolutely.
What did your study reveal regarding trip generation between the two uses?
Shall I just go from this?
Sure.
Okay. So A16 is 24 pages. It's 4 pages of text, 4 pages of figures, and the remainder being supporting material. There were 5 key issues that were investigated: existing traffic count data, trip generation, comparisons, anticipated site impact, accident investigations. I'm just reading from page 1 of A16. And then there was a 5th element that was added relatively late, that was parking investigations, which I failed to illustrate on page 1, but is included in A16. The traffic count data was gathered from a PennDOT resource, where I looked to see what the existing traffic volume along Sproul Road is today, or the most recent data available from PennDOT. That is part of A16. It's actually following figure 3, is a graphic that shows some of the information gathered from the PennDOT website. Sproul Road processes about 8,000 trips per day. Traffic engineers typically focus on peak hour operation. That's how all of our software is calibrated, and a lot of the empirical data collected by ITE focuses on peak hourly flows. So one of the first things I did, as you'll see on the bottom of page 1 of A16, is I converted that average daily traffic figure into an approximate peak hourly figure, which is about 720 trips per hour in both directions. So that's the existing traffic count along Sproul Road. And then page 2 of A16, I get into the trip generation investigations I did, as council mentioned. Here in particular, I was interested not only in what the application would generate, but also what the existing use currently generates. And so I could compare apples to apples. I decided to use ITE for both comparisons rather than rely on counts at the existing operation today, especially in light of the pandemic, and as you heard from the first witness, the reduced enrollment at present. So page 2 of A16 has 2 tables. I'll focus briefly on table 2 at the bottom. This shows the daily and weekday AM and weekday PM peak hour trip generation estimates per ITE for the school, which is entitled Daycare Center. It's columns 2, 3, and 4. And then the best fit for ITE for the proposed use is a medical dental office building, is how ITE terms it. So those are columns 5, 6, and 7. And if you look at the last 3 columns of table 2, you see a lot of negative numbers. That's because the proposed use generates significantly less traffic than the existing use. In fact, during the weekday AM and weekday PM peak hours, according to ITE, the reduction is on the order of 70%. So it's a relatively significant reduction. Turning to page 3 of A16, anticipated site impact. I performed a quick level of service analysis of the site driveway using the ITE trip generation numbers married with the peak hourly flows on Sproul Road as I described. I found that the levels of service were B or better, basically A or B, at the site driveway, which is certainly an acceptable, if not desirable, condition. Fourthly, I looked into the accident history. The application has really nothing to do with accident history. Accident history is what it is. Nevertheless, it's certainly not a bad idea to see if there is an existing accident problem. And what I found, as you can see in tables 3 and table 4 on page 3 of A16, is that the accident history is actually quite low, averaging about one crash per year. The PennDOT rule of thumb is that you need to have 5 or more reportable and potentially correctable crashes over a 12-month period before you generally even consider starting to look at whether a corrective measure could improve the situation. So here we're far from that number, just in total crashes, not even looking at what's correctable versus not correctable. A case of a not correctable crash might be driver distraction, driver drunkenness. There's no correction you can do for that other than driver education. Page 4 of A16, the top, looks in parking generation, the 5th element of the study. Once again, ITE was consulted. In addition to their rather blandly named trip generation manual, they also put out a parking generation manual, currently in its 5th edition. And once again, the land use code for medical dental office is included in that publication. And according to ITE, the average weekday peak parking demand is 3.23 spaces per 1,000 square feet for this use. And at approximately 4,000 square feet, it's actually less, I believe it's 3.6 thousand square feet. But if you just round up to 4 and multiply that out, you get a predicted peak parking demand of 13 spaces, which marries up nicely with the plan, which provides 14 spaces. So in conclusion, the accident history is unremarkable, the parking supply is adequate, the anticipated site impact and driveway operation is acceptable, if not desirable, and the site will actually generate significantly less traffic than what currently exists.
Let me just ask you 2 quick questions to sum up. Within a reasonable degree of scientific certainty, do you have an opinion on the impact of traffic in the vicinity on this site?
Yes.
And what is that opinion?
That it's minimal.
Do you also have an opinion within a reasonable degree of scientific certainty of the parking sufficiency at this site?
I do.
And what is that opinion?
The parking supply is adequate.
Thank you. I have nothing further.
Board questions for this witness? No questions. Mr. Cornelia, anything else?
That's all I have. A request that the exhibits be made part of the record, please.
Without objection, I do have one question, though.
Yes.
Is your better argument special exception or use variance?
Special exception, obviously, because there's less of a burden on the special exception.
Okay, thank you. Are there any members of the public who wish to speak to this application? Okay, hearing none, I would move that the applicant be granted pursuant to special exception the relief that is requested to change a non-conforming use to another non-conforming use at the property. Is there a second? Second. Any board discussion?
I think this actually will be an improvement in that area. One of the things that Mr. Devaney didn't discuss was that the traffic will be spread over the entire period that the facility is open rather than at peak times, which would improve things right there. And putting my old commissioner's hat on, I can see an increase in revenue stream benefiting the township. That's it.
Okay, any other board comments? Hearing none?
Mr. Chairman, actually, Nick, do you agree you need a variance for the parking as well as a special exception for the use?
I think it may fall into special exception as well because it's still part of the use really is the parking.
Okay.
So, but whatever the board prefers, as again, I.
Not making any changes, so I
think it falls under special exception just because it's still a non-conforming use and non-conformity regarding the parking situation, so.
I'm tempted to ask you to request the variance for the parking. I don't have the specific rule citation in front of me. I don't know. 103? Okay. So I'll amend my prior motion to also include the grant of a variance for the parking requirement set forth in section 280-103?
Correct.
Is the recommendation do it under medical or office?
Well, I think the use is medical, is it not?
Okay, so
Yeah.
it'd be 9, or excuse me, it would be 8, 103-8.
Was not getting, yeah, correct.
So
103B8.
variance from the requirements of section 280-103.
B8.
8. B8. Is there a second for the amendment of the motion? Please. Thank you. Any board discussion on the amendment? Hearing none. We'll call the vote on the amended motion. Mr. John Nagel. Mr. Lord? Aye. Mr. George Nagel?
Aye.
Mr. Delizia? Aye. And I'm also in favor, 5-0. Best of luck with the project. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good evening.
Heavens. Okay. Moving on to appeal number 3110. The applicant KMO-361 Realty Associates LLC, property located at 550 East Lancaster Avenue and zoned PB planned business. The applicant requests a variance from section 280-123B to permit installation of 2 wall signs higher than 15 feet above existing grade. Mr. Brosman.
I'm going to stand in for Mr. Brosman this evening. Rob Lewis from Captain Stewart.
Okay, sorry.
No worries.
Sorry.
I've been called a lot worse. I think Mr. Brosman might be the only one insulted by that comment.
Mr. Lewis.
Good evening. Rob Lewis from Kaplan Stewart. I represent the applicant, KMO 361 Realty Associates, LLC, the owner of the St. David Square Shopping Center, which is located at 550 East Lancaster Avenue. I have before the board tonight a bit of an interesting and uncommon situation, one that actually in my 20 years of land use and zoning practice I have not yet faced. In February of 2019, my clients actually obtained zoning relief to permit the installation of 2 signs at heights of 24 feet and 24 feet 6 inches for what is known as the Micro Center building within the St. David Square Shopping Center. And that is for a new Micro Center sign and for a home goods sign. The signage was part of a re-tenanting process for the property wherein Micro Center space, which is 50,000 square feet, was going to be reduced to 25,000 square feet, and home goods is going to relocate to the remaining 25,000 square feet from where they are in the rear of the center today. Unfortunately, there were some delays by my just with tenanting issues and so forth on the property, and as we all know, the pandemic hit, which set retail back tremendously, and really the project for the moment had been shelved. During that time, while the project was on the shelf, the zoning relief granted by this board expired. And unfortunately, we did not obtain an extension of that because we weren't sure whether or not the project was going to move forward. So we're actually back here this evening.
Excuse me for a second. Sure. Folks, could you have that conversation outside, please? Thank you. Thank you.
No, absolutely. So we're actually back here this evening because the project is now intending to move forward, seeking the exact same relief for the exact same signs from the exact same ordinance provision. Everything about the application this evening is identical to what this board saw back in 2019. I'm certainly happy to proceed any way the board would like this evening. You've already had a number of applications, and I know you have more this evening. If I can, I'd like to actually simply request that the board incorporate the record from 2019 and then allow me to ask my engineer a few comments, just verifying that nothing in fact has changed about the property since 2019 and that the request for relief and the signage is identical rather than starting an entire new record.
I have no objection to that. Is there any other objection from the board? We thank you in advance.
Thank you. Well, and
George would not have done that.
Okay, so let me do my best to be brief, but I have handed the board pre-marked exhibits. So in addition to asking the board to incorporate the record from January 22nd, 2019, I'd ask that the board accept applicants' exhibits A1 through A7, which I've handed to the board. Just briefly to identify those for the record, A1 is another copy of the deed to the property, vesting title to 550 East Lancaster Avenue, and my client, KMO 361 Realty Associates, LLC. Exhibit A2 is actually a copy of that February 21st, 2019 decision where this board granted the identical relief as we're requesting this evening. That relief being from Section 280-123B of the zoning ordinance, and that is to permit 2 wall signs to be located above 15 feet in the PB Planned Business District, the heights to be consistent with the specifications of the sign plans. Those are, as I mentioned earlier, 24 feet and 24 feet 6 inches. Exhibit A3 is simply an aerial plan of the property. A4 is an existing conditions plan that was prepared by Site Engineering Concepts. A5 is a series of photographs of the property, really highlighting what the board found previously, which are physical circumstances of the property and how those physical circumstances impede the visibility of the building. Setback from Lancaster Avenue, the slope of the property, and then even the building itself, which has a large overhang that prevents visibility. A6 is a plan prepared by MS Consultants, Inc., entitled Rendering, Sheet A202, and that's actually dated January 23, 2019, and that depicts those proposed signs on the facade of that Micro Center building located on my client's property. And A7 is simply the CV of our civil engineer, Rob Lambert, of Site Engineering Concepts. So with that introduction, if I may, I'll call Mr. Lambert very briefly.
Please. Norman?
I do. Rob Lambert.
Mr. Lambert, with whom are you currently employed?
Site Engineering Concepts.
And are you a licensed engineer in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania?
I am.
And I have marked and shown you previously applicant's Exhibit A7. Is that an accurate copy of your academic and professional credentials?
Yes, it is.
And am I correct that you have previously testified before municipal bodies, including zoning hearing boards, including the very zoning hearing board we're in front of this evening, and in those proceedings been offered and accepted as an expert in civil engineering?
Yes, many times.
And you're familiar with the property that's subject to this proceeding?
I am.
And am I also correct that the plans that are part of the exhibit package at applicant's Exhibit A3 and A4 were prepared by you or at your direction?
Yes.
I would offer Mr. Lambert as an expert in civil engineering.
Without objection.
Mr. Lambert, you heard me describe for the board that this evening we are seeking identical relief for proposed identical signs, relief that had been granted back in 2019. Are you aware of those facts?
Yes, I am.
And were you part of the team that prepared the application in 2019?
Yes.
And am I correct that you also appeared before the Design Review Board in 2019 to present those signs for their review?
Yes, I believe so.
Mr. Lambert, since 2019, when this board granted the requested relief to permit the installation of those signs, have any physical circumstances of the property changed?
Property's unchanged.
And to your knowledge, are the signs that we are proposing identical to those that were proposed and approved by the board in 2019?
Yes, it's the same plan.
And to your knowledge, has the ordinance remained the same, so we are seeking identical relief from the ordinance as we did in 2019?
It's my understanding the ordinance is the same.
And Mr. Lambert, at the prior hearing in 2019, your associate, Mr. Spellman, testified that if the board were to grant the requested relief, that the requested relief would not be detrimental to the public health, safety, or welfare. Do you agree with Mr. Spellman's conclusion from 2019?
Yes, I do.
That's all I have for Mr. Lambert.
Any questions from the board for this witness?
That's all I have. I just ask that the board admit into the record both the January 2019 record as well as applicants' exhibits A1 through A7.
Without objection.
Thank you.
Is there any comment from members of the public on this application? Okay, seeing none, I will move that the board grant the relief requested, the variance from Section 280-123B as requested in the application and the testimony that's been presented this evening. Is there a second? Any board discussion?
Can I still ask a question?
Oh, I'm sorry, sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I'm just trying to distinguish what you're asking for now as opposed to what you received 2 years ago. It seems to be the same thing.
It's absolutely identical.
So why are you here?
We are here because that relief technically expired.
Ah. Okay.
Same exact relief. The project had just been temporarily shelved,
All
so
right.
we did
I
not
was looking
proceed.
for a difference in the signs. I didn't know. What are you? All right, thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, we have a motion that has been moved and seconded. Is there any board discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the vote. Ms. Foreman? Aye. Mr. Lord? Aye. Mr. George Nagel?
Aye.
Mr. Delizia? Aye. And I'm in favor as well, 5-0. Good luck with the project. See you again when?
Probably soon. Thank you very much.
Good luck, thank you. The next case has the potential for being a fairly lengthy one. Would the board like to take a 5-minute break? Okay, we will stand in recess for 5 minutes. Thank you.
already submitted those, right? They should have those, these are new ones.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
This is the 1-minute warning.
Okay.
Okay, we're back on the record. Next matter is appeal number 3113. The applicant Radnor Rockwell LLC, property located at 1001 Eagle Road and zoned PI Planned Institutional District. The applicant seeks a special exception under Code Section 280-68B to redevelop and use a portion of the subject property as a home for the aged/life care residents. Mr. Brosman.
Good evening. I'm George Brosman, representing the applicant, Rockwell Radnor LLC. They're the equitable owner of a portion of the Valley Forge Military Academy and College property. It has an address of 1001 Eagle Road. It's located in the Radnor Township PI Planned Institutional Zoning District. I have a series of witnesses this evening, some short remarks to start out. As you'll hear, the applicant is proposing to redevelop this property, and as was noted in the notice that you read, it is proposed to be a home for the aged / life care residents, which is a use that is permitted in the PI Planned Institutional District by special exception. You'll hear that the proposed facility will be on about 23.6 acres that are currently part of the Valley Forge Military Academy and College campus. That campus has several parcels in Radnor Township and some in Tredyffrin Township. The portion of campus in question that's for this application is all within Radnor Township, and it's the part that's over next to Cabrini University to the east, and to the west would be the remaining lands of the Valley Forge Military Academy and College. In the back is St. David's Golf Club, but that is in Tredyffrin Township. The special exception we seek is under 280-68B, and I would like to note I handed out some of our exhibits. The first one was just a copy of our application that we filed, A1. And with that introduction, I'd like to call my first witness, Gregory Lingo.
Please.
Yeah, I can give you those.
I do. Gregory Lingo, Lingo.
Greg, are you a principal with the applicant?
I am.
And are you familiar with the property that is the subject of this application?
I am.
And does Rockwell Radnor LLC have an agreement to purchase the property?
We do.
And at the application we filed, Exhibit A1A, is that a copy of the cover page and signature page of that agreement?
Yes, it is.
Is the agreement for Rockwell Radnor LLC to purchase the property still in effect?
It is.
And Are you a Radnor Township resident?
Yes.
Can you briefly describe why you've decided to pursue approval of this type of facility at this site?
Yeah, I'm really excited about this project. This is something I don't feel like we have in Radnor Township. I've lived in Radnor Township since 2009, when, after we moved to the township, we moved my father close by, about 6 houses away, and as he was aging, our options to keep him in the community really became limited. And I'm just really excited about the idea of people from the township being able to age in the township. The idea of this life care residence where people can kind of age in place and have their needs met as they age isn't here right now, in my mind, in my opinion, and I think I'm just really excited about it.
And did you discuss this project with some of the neighbors in the area?
Yes, we did. We had 5 meetings on site with neighbors, throughout the summer. The most recent one was on September 7th. We met with the North Wayne Protective Association. We had quite a turnout, and the meetings really helped make the plan a better plan. We actually resubmitted a new plan after those meetings as a result of the feedback that we got from the neighbors. And in response to the neighbors' questions, concerns, things they were pointing out to us, we decided to move most of the development further up into the property, keep it away from the adjacent neighbor or any nearby neighbors. It reduced impervious. It was more sensitive to the vegetation of the property, and we felt like those interactions with the neighbors really, at the end, we developed a better plan as a result of it.
And did you also present this application to the Radnor Township Planning Commission? I believe it was September 14th?
We did, and we received a unanimous recommendation for approval.
And I handed it out to the board as A2, a copy of the minutes from that meeting. Although this project is in the early stages, probably the first stage of the approval process for a project like this that will also require land development approval and permitting, have you begun to consider architectural concepts for the proposed buildings?
We did, actually. We started engaging with Blackney Hayes, local architectural firm, with some renderings.
And we've marked that as A3, and we're putting a larger copy here and left a smaller copy with the board. And I don't know if you want to make any brief comments about this concept.
Really, we're still in the infancy here. We're going to start with following this, we'll go through the land development and really get a better idea of what type of footprints we have. But the product that we've kind of morphed into as a result of the meetings with the neighbors, we felt like we could kind of keep it all on one part of the property, up a little bit tighter to the St. David's golf course side, rather than down towards the St. David's side. And that was a result of the meetings where people were concerned about light pollution, noise pollution, and also just we felt like by having it up further, it was just a better area. We were able to keep it out of steep slopes and kind of minimize any of the environmental impacts.
Thanks. That's all I have for Greg.
Any questions from members of the board?
The current owner is Rockwell Radnor LLC. It's a Pennsylvania limited liability company?
We are the equitable owner, yes.
Okay. And if the deal goes through, will you be the owner of the
Yes, sir.
And the developer of it?
Yes, sir.
And it'll be a for-profit company?
Yes, sir.
Thanks.
George, I just wanted to, are we going to go through the plans to show where the proposed new construction is?
Yes.
Where it sits on the site? Okay.
Yes, in fact, I could give you a brief roadmap of the witnesses we have. Our next witness is Rob Lambert, who's a civil engineer. He'll go over the existing and proposed plans. We have Dave DeLuca, who is going to be offered as an expert in the operations and design of these type of communities. He'll tell you some more about the operational aspects that are envisioned. We have Patrick Stewart, who's a registered landscape architect, whose firm has prepared a landscape and lighting plan. He'll go over those plans briefly. I think they're also will be covered at land development, but we'll go over them briefly. And then we have Chris Williams, who's a traffic engineer, who's prepared a traffic study, and he will go over that study. So we hope that we can answer all of your questions with that lineup. Okay.
Thank you.
Rob Lambert is next.
I do. Rob Lambert.
And Mr. Brosman, we will accept Mr. Lambert as an expert.
Thank you. For the record, I handed as A4 his professional qualifications. Rob, are you familiar with the property that is the subject of this application as well as the surrounding area?
Yes, I am very familiar.
And you're generally familiar with Radnor Township land use ordinances, including the zoning ordinance?
I am.
Is your firm the civil engineering firm for this project?
Yes, we are.
And did your firm prepare the special exception plan set along with Stewart Associates?
Yes, we did.
At A1, which was the application E, that was a smaller copy of the original special exception plan sets. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And have you made some revisions to that plan set?
Yeah, since the submission, we went to the Planning Commission. There were some good comments. One of the comments was about parking. So the current plan increased the amount of parking on site. And then as we've worked with Blackney Hayes on the building layout, they pointed out that building A, we enlarged the footprint on building A to accommodate more of the amenity space.
So I've handed out A5, which is the revised plan set. Is that what we'll be proceeding with for this application?
Yes.
And we do have a larger copies we can provide as well. I handed out 11 by 17s.
Yeah, if you have one for the record at the end, if you
We
could
do.
make it available, that'd be great. Thank you.
We will. Mr. Lambert, I want to focus on the location of the property and the existing conditions. Could we go to A6, which is the zoning map?
Oh, I just have a small one.
Oh,
That's okay. I can describe it.
why don't you grab, why don't we put it? So drawing your attention to A6, which is a blow-up of the Radnor Township zoning map in the area of the property, can you confirm the zoning of the property and the surrounding area that's shown on this township zoning map?
Yeah, so this is just an enlargement, as George said, of the zoning map, and I cut out a lot of the ancillary areas. The site is identified with a red dashed line, and it is all within the bluish-purple PI zone of the township zoning.
And let's take a look at sheet 1 of A5.
I got it right here.
This is an aerial photograph of the property in the area.
Yes, this is an aerial photograph. It was the same, roughly the same orientation as the zoning map. The property is identified with a cross-hatching in roughly the center of the image.
And can you describe the surrounding land uses?
Yeah, so on the bottom of the page, going roughly left to right, it zigzags a little bit, but that's Eagle Road. Off to the top of the page, you can see St. David's Golf Club, the green area up there. To the right, or east of the property, is Cabrini University. You can see the Cabrini Athletic Complex, including athletic field, in the upper right corner. And then to the left is the Valley Forge Military and College campus. And then going to the bottom of the page, there's one property. Right now there's a few houses there Earlier this week, it was just approved actually to remove those houses and build one house, which is identified as Lot 5. And then to the lower left is a property that was formerly owned by Valley Forge, then Eastern, and is now being developed into 18 single-family homes there.
And let's look at sheet 2 of Exhibit A5, the existing conditions plan sheet. And looking at that, could you describe the existing conditions on the property?
Yeah, so this is sheet A5, Exhibit A5, sheet 2. You can see Eagle Road identified on the lower left of the page. The gray areas in general are paving or gravel areas. The brown areas are buildings. Various slopes are identified in a pink, blue, or green color on the property. So down on Eagle Road, you can see roughly through the center of the site is a driveway that's gray that comes in. There are the brown houses. So there's, I believe it was 26 existing dwellings on the property. And then there's 2 academic buildings on the upper right of the property. Adjacent to the buildings are a basketball court, a former tennis court that's now used for basketball. You can see the blue swimming pool with coping around the deck and various facilities around parking. There's actually a climbing wall, an outdoor amphitheater, softball field, and additional paving.
And are you aware if the property has stormwater management facilities on it?
The property does not have any stormwater. Like many of the properties in the area, the era that they were built, stormwater was not a requirement, and so it just has no stormwater management.
Turning to the proposed plan, which I think is sheet 4 of Exhibit A5, and we also have an illustrative site plan at A7. Using those plans, describe the proposed site plan.
So I'll use A5 sheet 4. We stayed to the same color scheme, except for we added green to areas that are going to be generally landscape areas, just to help visibility on the plan. So again, it's the same orientation as the previous sheet. Eagle Road, you can see on the lower left. The gray driveway, we're proposing to construct the driveway coming into the site, going up. And I didn't fail to mention before, Eagle Road is much lower elevation than the area of the development. And then the road goes up to the area where the former academic buildings currently exist, the tennis court, the swimming pool, and ancillary facilities. So we have the proposed building A, which is roughly in the center of the site. It's a U-shaped building. There's actually 3 buildings that are attached to one another in that location. And then you have 6 perimeter buildings that follow the driveway around, going around that building.
And those buildings are labeled also with letters?
Yes, those are B through G, I believe, B, C, D, E, F, and G in a clockwise direction. For orientation purposes, off to the right of the development is the Cabrini campus. Off to the left of the development is the Valley Forge campus. And to the top of the page would be the St. David's Golf Club.
And not to steal too much of Mr. DeLuca's thunder, but can you give a general idea of the use of these buildings?
Yes, so the main building in the U shape, as I said, it's really 3 buildings that are connected to one another. That is going to house all of the kind of common areas, amenity spaces, dining, common athletic swimming pool type facilities. It will also house, it was 55 one-bedroom suites, plus it was 30 personal care units and 20 memory care units is what's envisioned for that building.
And how about buildings B through G?
So buildings B through G will each house 15, what's envisioned again is a 2-bedroom independent living unit. So there'll be 15 units in each building. And then underneath the building, working with the grades, we're able to actually tuck parking in the building, so they'll have enclosed parking spaces inside the building. Within Building A, we've also included some enclosed parking, and we've also, given that there's really no back of house for a facility like this, because you do have buildings all around, we've contemplated putting a lot of the loading and service actually in that lower level of Building A. One thing I failed to mention was there are 5 existing houses that are proposed to remain closer to Eagle Road, so between the development and Eagle Road. And then there's 2 additional houses that are envisioned to remain and be part of the kind of administrative use of the building.
And a plan like this, if it were approved for special exception approval, will a land development plan also be required?
Yes.
And will the land development plans include a lot line change or a subdivision plan to create this property out of the larger parcels of the Valley Forge Military Academy and College?
Yes.
And you have a sheet in the plan that shows that?
Yes, it was sheet 3 of Exhibit A5.
And that's shown there in green as Lot 2?
That is correct.
And that Lot 2 matches the lot that we've been showing just now on the proposed plan?
Yes.
And all of the other plan sheets?
Correct.
Land development will address stormwater management, correct?
Yes, that is correct.
In your opinion, will stormwater management be required here?
Yes, we will have extensive stormwater management on this property as a result of the development.
And in your professional opinion, do you believe it will be feasible to install those systems?
Yes, I do not see any issues at this time.
And those details would be submitted and reviewed during land development?
Yes, that is correct.
Do the stormwater plans get reviewed and approved by any other agencies?
Yes, we will have to obtain a NPDES, so National Pollution Discharge Elimination System permit, through the Delaware County Conservation District. So with the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection and the Conservation District will review and approve those plans.
As I mentioned earlier, I would like to let the board know we do have another witness who will be coming next that will talk more about the operations. I'd like to, in the meantime, with Mr. Lambert, focus on the proposed plans and their compliance with applicable code standards for the PI district. So with that in mind, Rob, I want to review the specific provisions of the zoning ordinance for this type of use in the PI district. I'm going to turn your attention to Code Section 28069, which is the area and height limits and other requirements for the PI Planned Institutional District. Are you generally familiar with those provisions?
Yes, I am.
I'm just going to walk you through them and ask you to confirm if the plans comply for each one. We're going to be looking at sheet 4 of Exhibit A5, is that right?
That is correct.
Code Section 28069A requires a lot area of at least 10 acres with a minimum lot width of 300 feet at the building lines. Do the plans comply with these requirements?
Yes, for reference, there's a zoning table in the upper right-hand corner that includes the requirements, the existing and proposed lot, so the proposed development. 10 acres is required. We have roughly 23.6 acres. 300-foot width is required. We have 429 feet.
69B allows up to 30% building coverage. Do the plans comply with this limit?
Yes, the plan proposes 11.2% building area.
This provision also requires that at least 55% of the tract, exclusive of areas in the public right-of-way, be devoted to landscaping. Do the plans comply with that requirement?
Yes, we show the inverse. We show the impervious coverage is 23.4%, so 45% impervious would be permitted under that kind of inverse coverage there.
And Code 28069C allows building heights of up to 3 stories and up to 38 feet in height. Do the plans note compliance with those provisions?
Yes, 3 stories, and they're going to be less than or equal to 38 feet.
28069D requires that no building or permanent structure other than a guardhouse facility or a facility which provides controlled access to a property be located less than 120 feet from a street line. Do the plans meet this requirement?
Yes, the existing dwelling to remain that's closest to Eagle Road is slightly over 200 feet from the road. The proposed buildings are approximately 900 feet from Eagle Road.
And that plan shows the 120-foot setback line there?
Yes, you can see the setback line. It's identified as 120 feet from the Eagle Road right-of-way. It's identified by a darker dashed line going around the perimeter of the property.
This same code provision 69D also provides that no surface parking area, driveway, service, or interior roadway, with the exception of approved areas for vehicular access, be located less than 60 feet from a street right-of-way line. Do the plans comply?
Yes, you can see that only the driveway is within that area.
Code section 28069E establishes rear and side yard setbacks for the PI district. Can you explain what these required setbacks are and how the plans comply with those requirements?
Yes, the setbacks are based on the use in the PI district and what your adjacent use is. So looking at, we have institutional uses all the way around. A life care residence has a 75-foot setback. That setback is identified, again, that same dashed line that we referenced for the front yard is also shown for the side and rear yards as 75 feet.
And the zoning ordinance in that section specifically calls out as a Category 1 use, a life care residence?
Yes, it does.
And that's what the 75-foot setback is based on?
That is correct.
28069G requires, when there's a stream, a riparian buffer setback of 35 feet. Do the plans comply?
Yes. It's a little bit hard to see on this plan, but on the left-hand side of the property, so the property is in the green color, there is a dashed line showing a 35-foot setback. There's a road that's called Lynch Road. It's actually an internal driveway to Valley Forge, but it does have a name. There is a stream that runs roughly parallel with the western property boundary or the left property boundary of the property, and we included the 35-foot setback along that stream.
I'm going to switch to another code provision. The township recently adopted an ordinance that's now codified at 280.115.6, requiring that uses identified in 280.68B, which our use is, including residential uses that provide support services such as memory care, continuing care, senior living, and similar uses, provide at least 15% of the tract area as common open space. Do the plans satisfy those requirements?
Yes, sheet A5, exhibit A5, sheet 4. On the left-hand side underneath the location map, there's an open space plan. And so the area designated in the darker green color is the area that we've tabulated. 15% is required. The green area represents 21.7%.
And there were certain exclusions required. Did you follow all of the applicable rules for that?
Yes, if you note on the upper...
Excuse me, George, could you slide that over so that we can see what, thank you.
Thank you.
If you look at the upper left-hand corner of that, you can see the riparian buffer is not included in that area. That was one of the exclusions. It's unclear. The code requires a buffer, but exempts it if you have a like use with like density. Given that they were school uses adjacent, we took a conservative approach and assumed that there would be a 20-foot buffer requirement along all the property lines. And so we did not include that 20-foot buffer going around the perimeter either.
back to 28069E2. This is a formula that's in the PI district that applies to certain uses, and it is a formula that sets the maximum number of beds that are permitted in a convalescent home, a nursing home, or a similar facility. Assuming this formula would be applied to the proposed use, do the plans comply with that formula?
Yes, Exhibit A5, Sheet 4. On the right-hand side, there's a table that says bed summary. And there's a formula that says that you're permitted 50 beds for the first 5 acres, and then you're allowed 1 additional bed per 2,500 square feet in excess of the 5 acres. Using the math, you come up to total allowed beds is 375 beds. Building A included the 105 beds. The perimeter buildings for the life care residences, we talk those as 2 bedrooms, so we actually counted each unit as being 2 beds. In that, plus we counted 2 beds in each of the houses to remain for a total of 295 beds proposed.
So in compliance with the formula if it was applied to all of the buildings?
Yes.
In the PI district, there's another code section, 280-70, called Special Regulations. I'm going to go over those with you now. 280-70A requires that the tract of land on which each permitted use is conducted shall in its entirety be owned and operated as a single or common management and maintenance unit with common open space, parking, utility, maintenance, and service facilities and services. Is the proposed use in compliance with that?
Yes, it is.
280-70B has some additional building size and spacing requirements. Can you explain how the plans comply with those standards?
Yes, so the building length requirement is that you're permitted a 160-foot long building. So if you look at Exhibit A5, Sheet 4, each of the buildings is dimensioned, and so the perimeter buildings are shown as 160 feet by 92 feet. So all the buildings B through G would comply. The code also permits to have 3 buildings attached to one another if they're roughly set at 90 degrees. And so the U-shaped, as I mentioned, it's really 3 buildings, is currently contemplated at 160-foot length by a 60-foot width for the bottom of the U for building A. And then each of the kind of arms or uprights of the building A, so the 2 other buildings related to that, were 160 feet by a maximum of 100 feet. So those would comply. There's also a separation requirement between the buildings. It was 45 feet, and the plans comply. You can see dimensions shown on this plan that they're 46 feet apart. The small buildings to remain are of nominal size.
And there's a code section 280-70B3 that states that the width of a building or the aggregate width of a building fronting on a street not exceed 80% of the lot width. We don't really have buildings on the street, but can you comment on this provision?
Yes, the only building that I would see, I don't think we really front. We're over 200 feet back from Eagle Road, but even if you would consider the small building to remain, we're well within that limitation.
And 280-70C requires that service, utility, maintenance, and storage areas, and it spells out different types of areas, loading and unloading, heating, ventilation, and air conditioning equipment be screened from view from public streets and abutting properties. Do the plans comply with these provisions?
Yes. Not only the siting of all the improvements where they're located are really screened from adjacent properties, but from a practical perspective, it's really we're going to be screening it from our own residents in the facility.
And you mentioned there'd be some loading contained within the buildings, and there's an enclosed dumpster, is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
28070D addresses storage of vehicles, basically saying that if there is storage of vehicles on site, that they be screened as well. Would the plans be in compliance with that requirement?
Yes, they would.
28070E1 references other code sections, 28103, which relates to parking, 28104, which relates to loading, and 28105, which relates to, I believe, access and highway frontage. Let's tackle the parking first. Looking at 28103B, can you explain how the plans comply with the applicable parking requirements?
Yeah, so you're using Exhibit A5, Sheet 4. There's a parking summary table on the lower right. We broke it up into Building A and then Buildings B through G and Dwellings 1 through 7 on the table, just to help simplify it. For this use, it's 1 parking space per 3 beds. The building had 105 permanent beds for 35 parking spaces, 1 space per medical staff member. We've allocated 10, and I say allocated. Medical staff member was a broad term, so we actually try to be conservative and have allocated anyone working in the personal care realm as being a medical staff member. I'm not sure if technically they would fall into that category, but that was conservative. And then 1 space per 2 employees, and so we used the highest shift. And that became a total of 68 parking spaces required for Building A. For interior in the building, we had 25 spaces, and then the exterior parking lot, we had 72 spaces. So we're providing 97 parking spaces where 68 were required. For Buildings B through G and Dwellings 1 through 7, we applied the same formula with 1 space per 3 beds. We have 190 beds, so it was 63 parking spaces. We've actually included the parking inside of each building, and so we had 25 parking spaces in the lower level of each one of the buildings, which was 150 parking spaces provided for those uses.
And the 5 dwellings?
And the 5 dwellings, it was actually included in the total number.
Okay.
We didn't include the 150, but there's existing parking around each one of those buildings.
So bottom line, is it 131 spaces computed to be required and 247 proposed?
That is correct.
28104 addresses loading. My read of it is there's no specific requirement for this type of use. Just says that there should be loading to address the demands. Can you describe, and you touched on it before, but where you'll have the loading?
Yes, we talked about a lot of this was designed, obviously, looking at the code, but also looking at the development. And the residents here are going to be the closest one to all of it. So we looked at putting a lot of the loading underneath the main level of the building. And so we were coming off of where the circle was and would have loading interior. Small package delivery, could be dropped off right at the front door, but the major supply loading would be in the rear of the building.
280-105, as I mentioned, has some various topics, including access and highway frontage. Let's go into that. 280-105A provides that no parking area or area for the storage or movement of motor vehicles shall directly abut the public street or highway. Do the plans comply with that requirement?
Yes, we have 1 access point to Eagle Road, and everything else would be interior.
And there was something in the code that said the width of the common service driveway at the entrance to the various parking areas should not exceed 35 feet. Do the plans comply with that?
Yes, they do.
280-105B applies to they called it an integrated plan in the planned institutional district. I'd like to look at those standards. Number 1, are all parking, loading, or service areas entirely located within the lot lines of the property that will be created?
Yes.
Do all of the buildings front upon a service drive or road and common parking lot that does not directly abut the public street.
Yes.
Is the proposed driveway to Eagle Road located at least 100 feet from the intersection of any other street?
Yes.
Mr. Williams will talk about the fourth provision about the service drive being designed in a manner conducive to safe exiting and entrance, so we'll skip that. 280-105C notes that there should be a traffic survey when you're doing a development in the planned institutional district that abuts a state highway. Is Eagle Road a state highway?
Yes, it is.
And we've done a traffic study,
Yes, Mr. Williams is here.
and that will be submitted to PennDOT in due course.
Yes.
280-105D and E deal with lighting, and Mr. Stewart will address that. 280-105F provides that no parking, loading, or service area should be in the front yard setbacks. Do the plans satisfy that requirement?
Yes, they do.
Okay, we've gone through all the provisions that were referenced in 280-70E1, so I want to go back to 280-70E2, which addresses screening of the off-street parking. Are the parking areas screened?
Yes, as we talked about, there's both distance and elevation from Eagle Road that you will not be able to see the parking area proposed, and the other ones were internal to the building. Again, likewise, there's a lot of screening between adjacent properties.
And 280-70E3 provides that vehicular access to a property getting developed in the PI district should be limited to streets classified in Chapter 255 subdivision of land, which is the subdivision and land development ordinance of the township. Should be limited to a road that's classified in that provision as arterial, primary collector, or secondary collector per the subdivision and land development ordinance 255-27B3C. What is the designation of Eagle Road?
I believe there's a major collector.
Yes, so and satisfies that provision. 281-45 contains general standards for the review of special exception applications. Are you familiar with those standards?
I am.
Without going through each of them, unless the board would like us to, can you state in your professional opinion if the proposed use and the proposed plan is consistent with the applicable criteria?
Yes, they are.
In your professional opinion, will the proposed plan have any greater detrimental impacts on adjoining properties or the general public health, safety, and welfare than a typical similar development?
No, it will not.
That's all I have for Mr. Lambert.
Any questions from members of the board?
Mr. Lambert, you may be aware that there are some issues with the availability of storage capacity. So do you have space on the site to do an on-site system if you got forced into that?
Yes, I believe we'd be able to accommodate the sewer on site.
Thank you. That's all I had.
I have a couple questions. One, I guess, is a more general question. This is not a final plan. This is a conceptual plan, but fairly well along. I mean, it still has to go through Saldo, obviously, but we would expect that this is the plan that would be submitted as part of land development?
Yes, we will, as most plans that will come through this stage, there will be modifications of, proposed grading, precise building footprints, how certain things lay out, but the building, kind of building A is going to be in that location, right? Are all these corners going to be exactly the way they are? Probably not, but it's going to be the massing of it. The location is going to be in that location, along with the perimeter buildings. As we go through land development, as you're aware, we're going to get lots of feedback from the township reviewers, and we'll be addressing that feedback as we go through the process.
And I asked the question because, obviously for example, there's some steep slopes on the property. And, without without getting too far into it, it could be that some of the properties that or some of the buildings that are being constructed may implicate steep slope, depending on where they actually end up being on the site. Is that
So
correct?
this plan was very specifically drawn to avoid any of those slopes.
But all intentions, well intentions aside, it could end up at some point that there could be a relocation of a property that would implicate steep slope, and at that point, you'd have to come back to us.
We understand that, yes.
So we are, in essence, being asked to approve the concept, not the exact implementation of the concept.
We're not asking for any steep slope relief.
No, I understand that. Okay, we'll get, thank you.
But at your point, if we turned out we moved something around and we needed it, we would have to come back to you if we wanted to seek that. We understand you're not giving that to us.
Okay, next.
So I understand this is a request for a special exception for a use. That's set forth in the ordinance. Okay, got it. Right. Taking next the structures that are on the property that will remain, which will be the 5 properties along the left side of the access road, and are the two to the right?
Two on the east, yeah. 2 on the east, 5 on the west.
With respect, you've testified that the 2 to the east are for administrative / operational type use.
Correct.
How about the 5 to the west of the access road?
The 5 to the west will either be the independent living units and kind of more of a cottage setting versus the larger building setting. Alternatively, they could be a residence for, likely an administrator of the facility.
So those properties presumably will be modified, improved, renovated.
Yes.
So we, to the extent required, the footprints might change, certainly not into the setbacks, because then that means you have to come back to us.
Correct.
But, so we can expect modifications there. Okay. The last question related to the open space requirement, and notice a sort of a sharp demarcation, if you will, on sheet 4 of A5. The 7 existing structures, are excluded from that, as is the space around those structures. Is that correct?
Correct.
Is there a present intention or expectation that additional properties or additional structures could be added within that space that's not designated as open space?
It was more driven from the code requirement that the area be contiguous. We provided 30% more open space than was required by the code and stopped. From a practical perspective, there is no intent to develop the lower area at all.
Not to be greedy, but if you're not going to develop it, I know this is a Saldo question, but
when it gets to Saldo, we need flexibility. If we have to push it further down or massage it, the board can approve separate areas. So if the board was more inclined to have the lower area preserved, we would be able to address that at that time.
Yeah, it was just a somewhat general question. We understand that planning will have its run at it, and we'll make observations. Okay, that's it for me. Any other?
Since you were asking about changes to the plan, one thing you might noticed in the Planning Commission comments, there was a resident that was concerned right adjacent to the east side of the entrance driveway. There's an existing structure there. and you can see it on the old gatehouse, was interested in potentially preserving that. We said we're going to investigate it, and if we're able to save that, that may be within the 120 feet, which actually I believe is permitted by the code. So if we're able to preserve that structure, we will. And so that may be one modification that you would see, but it was really to address a resident concern.
Okay, thanks. Any other board questions? Thank you.
I'd like to call Dave DeLuca. That's probably where we stopped. I had only handed out A 1 through 7. Mr. Lambert's going to give you A 8 and some others. Did you get sworn in?
Yes, I do. David DeLuca. Sure, David DeLuca. Oh, okay, sure.
I know Mr. DeLuca works in the senior industry, so he was cautious about wearing the mask for his job, but
We're relegated to it. DE_LUCA.
Dave, I handed up Exhibit A8. It was a summary, a very short one of your background. Could you describe your educational and professional background to the board?
Sure, educational. Earned my master's degree from LaSalle University in management and finance. My undergraduate work was at Susquehanna University in psychology and business.
And what have you been doing professionally?
The last 14 years, I've worked for Liberty Lutheran, as an executive managing our senior care communities. We have a number of executives. I've been doing that for quite a while. And prior to the 14 years with Liberty Lutheran, I worked for about 25 years with national home building companies and also private commercial and residential real estate interests.
And what's your current position at Liberty Lutheran?
Director of Real Estate.
And can you briefly describe Liberty Lutheran?
Sure. We are a nonprofit organization. We manage and operate 1,000 senior care, senior living units in the 5-county Philadelphia area, and State College, Penn State. We also operate a home healthcare company.
And are you and Liberty Lutheran serving as a life care resident consultant for this project?
Yes, we are.
I'd like to offer Dave as an expert in the operation of life care residence communities.
Without objection.
Dave, have you made yourself familiar with the property that's subject to this application?
Yes, I have.
And have you familiarized yourself with the plans for the project?
Yes, we have.
And were you here this evening and heard the prior testimony of Greg Lingo and Rob Lambert?
Yes.
Mr. Lambert went over the anticipated number of units and beds in the proposed community. You don't have to rehash that, but can you elaborate a little more on the facility and those units and Building A and those types of things?
Sure. And I apologize if I'm being redundant, but I'll just sort of go through in maybe a little more detail than what you heard already. But the main building, Building A, we have planned as total of 105 units, as you've heard. we see within that 105, excuse me, within that 105 units, we see a mix of 55 independent living units and 50 personal care units. Of the 50 personal care units, we plan on a 20-unit household of memory support units. So that would be in Building A, the 105. Then you move out to the buildings on the perimeter, and you have the 6 buildings of 15 units each, and for a total of 90 independent living units out there, all 2-bedroom units. And then, of course, you have the existing dwellings down below, if you will. There are 7 of them. I think, as was discussed a bit earlier, the 5 on the left we would envision to be residences or staff residences, and on the right would be staff for maintenance, something for our operation to work in.
Now, I know the building isn't designed, but looking at, we've called it Building A on the plan, the kind of the main building. Can you give an example of, you went over the units that would be in there, and Mr. Lambert touched on some amenities. Can you give an idea of some of the other things that would be in that building?
Sure. So one of the main features will be extended, very extensive dining venue, be one of the main features. Such an important feature, the dining feature. That will be key. The other features of that main building will be a pool, fitness and wellness center. Wellness programs are key to our industry and our business. We'd see a number of other activity rooms in the building, such as club rooms for other activities. The rest of the building would be comprised of offices for administration and, of course, the maintenance staff.
Based on your experience, can you describe the general average age or age range of residents that live in a community like this?
Sure. The independent living units, while we do have communities currently where our average age is well into the 80s for independent living, on average, across the board, we see that being in the 70s and 80s, while in personal care, well into the 80s on average age.
And can you describe some of the examples of services and support that would be provided or available for each type of the units that you've mentioned?
Sure. The personal care units would be, the type of services you can imagine, such as helping the residents with their ADLs or activities of daily living, dressing, dining, their activities every day. And it just depends on, every resident has a separate care plan, but that would be our portion of that household of 30 that would get our, what I call it, just a regular personal care program, all right, help with the ADLs. The 20-unit household of memory support would have further support, further care, all really tuned into individual resident care plans geared more for memory support activities, and so forth. And as you can imagine, or may have heard, in memory support units, they will be locked down. The exit doors are locked and need staff to access in and out, need codes and so forth. In addition to that, the personal care residents in the regular personal care, not necessarily memory support, sometimes may wear a bracelet or pendant should there be any risk of wander. That personal care household is also alarmed to alert us should that person try to exit that household. So that's a description of the personal care. The independent living the independent living units on the outlying buildings will have access to all the amenities in the main building, the programs that are in the main building, which frankly serve the independent living residents as much as they do the personal care residents, particularly the pool and the wellness programs. The other things that will be available to everyone in all the residents and communities, but especially used by the independent living residents, will be the shuttle bus, shuttle van, that will be available to take folks to doctor appointments, shopping, local cultural events, etc. The van and shuttle will also be there for taking employees to the train station, but residents will get quite a bit of use out of it. The other piece of the independent living residents in terms of features that's a real key feature to this is that they'll have access to the personal care should they or their spouse need it, so that there'll be a short walk down the driveway or down the hall, depending on which independent living unit they're in, and they can get the personal care they need or their spouse needs and be that close and be in the community. And still enjoy the dining with them and so forth. This also comes into play quite often in our communities where a spouse might go out to the hospital for a hospital stay and they want to come back, not quite ready to live in their senior living, independent living unit. They often will do a respite stay or a temporary stay in our personal care facility and be right there nearby their loved one, just a short walk away, and can get that respite and support they need in personal care before they move back to their residence in independent living.
Dave, is there monitoring, a system even for assistance, even in the independent living units? Could you talk about that?
Yes. The independent living units will have a 24-hour monitored call system and security checks, but the 24-hour system that's in place is similar to what you might see in the personal care. That's what you would call a nurse call in personal care. Is basically an emergency call in the independent living apartments, but that would be monitored 24/7. And should anyone need assistance for anything from something that is as minor as burnt the popcorn to something serious, they can pull or push a button or pull a cord depending on what room they're in. But there's a number of locations in every apartment that they'll be able to pull the cord, and 24-hour assistance will come down.
And are they offered the ability to have a meal plan?
Yes. As I said, dining is critical to our offering. There'll be extensive dining venues for them to choose from. There'll be contractual variations from resident to resident of what meal plan they choose, but certainly they can choose any from 1 to 3 a day, and will be available to any and all independent living residents.
And would there be ability to have housekeeping services, things like that?
Yes. As a matter of fact, the housekeeping is usually included. Some folks rarely opt out of it, but housekeeping and maintenance is included in the contract for independent living.
What is your experience with the movement of residents in the community? Say they start out in independent living and moving then within the community to personal or memory care?
Yeah, that's another. It sort of plays off of what I mentioned earlier, George, where the folks age in place in their senior living, independent living unit, and up in whether in the buildings or in the main building. And one of the key features for us to attract people to move in our communities, and that's a real value to them once they're here, is that peace of mind that they'll have the access to the personal care when they need it. And it's so important to be able to stay in your community, stay close by. I'm sure you can all imagine this, and many of you maybe have experienced yourself or where your family has, where your spouse needs care, and boy, wouldn't it be great if they're right in the community with you. And this is a critical feature for us and our residents.
When Mr. Lambert went over the parking, he touched on, due to the formula for parking staffing, based on your experience and the proposed buildings and the mix of units, what do you anticipate for levels of staff here?
Well, as you can imagine, there generally are 3 shifts where employees report to work, and they're the 7, typical, you might have heard 7 to 3, the morning and day shift, and then 3 to 11, 11 to 7. The busiest, highest level of staffing would be on the 7 to 3 shift, the day shift, and arrive between 6:30 and 7 a.m. And that level we have estimated at 55 staff. The levels go down to 29 in the later in the day and all the way down to 8 or so in the evening shift. So quite a difference, but it's understandable if you think about during the day, the 55 includes administrators, more maintenance, dining, staff, and so forth.
Mr. Lambert touched on this, and it sounds like the case, but will the facility be owned and operated as a single or common management and maintenance unit with common facilities, open space, parking, utility, and the like?
Yes.
And can you comment generally on how the buildings and grounds are usually maintained in a facility like this?
We maintain them. We do that in all our properties. We generally have our own housekeeping staff, our own maintenance staff, employees of Liberty Lutheran. The larger tasks often fall to outside vendors such as snow plowing and whatnot. But our maintenance staff gets involved in that, shovel snow and so forth. We are extremely cognizant of keeping our grounds in great condition. Certainly welcoming to visit any of our communities. And also we involve, certain landscape consultants at times to help us with plantings and whatnot, so our grounds are maintained very well.
And are some aspects of a facility like this require a license from the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania?
We anticipate the personal care portion, the 2 households I mentioned of 50 units in the main building, being licensed as a personal care facility by the Department of Public Welfare, DPW, from the state of Pennsylvania.
And with that, I assume there's oversight and requirements that happens?
Yes. The initial oversight is review of plans, and then an inspection for the initial occupancy, and then 1-year inspections, oftentimes spot inspections, regulations and submissions that have to be sent into the state and so forth.
That's all I have for Mr. DeLuca.
Any questions from members of the board? Ms. Form?
Sure.
Sorry, quick question. If we were to assume for 295 beds, would all those beds need 3 meals a day? We were looking at 900 meals. I'm just confused on how 55 staff would be caregiving, in personal care and memory care, independent living, and feeding. And then my second question is, that's a lot of food coming in and out. Can you just sort of explain the plan in terms of that much food coming in and out daily?
Well, the answer comes in 2 pieces. One is that the senior living residents that are in the outbuildings in particular oftentimes will opt for one meal a day, dinner. So that's probably most of the answer. There's a chance that the 55 that are in the main building might opt for another meal a day. They're in the building usually for a reason. A single occupant, maybe with some other issues, so they might opt for maybe one more meal a day, but even those independent living residents rarely will take 3 meals a day. The only ones we see doing 3 meals a day, and we need to do it, is for the 50 personal care. And as far as the food deliveries, we do use service for that. You've probably heard of them, but we could use a number of different ones. But at the end of the day, our deliveries are consolidated, usually in the morning, usually early in the week, are brought in, I'd say, in the neighborhood of about 10 a week for deliveries. Now, that doesn't include your mail deliveries and FedEx, and I'm talking about the trucks that you're probably thinking about, the food trucks. Those kind of trucks are probably about 10 a week for a community this size. Sure.
Based on your testimony, am I correct, and perhaps I missed this, it's anticipated that Liberty Lutheran will manage this operation?
Well, seeing I'm here as a consultant, it's hard to say that that's a given, but we certainly love the community prospect. We love the project, or that's one of the reasons I'm here, that we're engaged as a consultant, is because we would envision ourselves as operating the community, managing and operating the community. Not necessarily. You could say that. Don't know yet. That isn't our plan, by the way. Managing and operating it is our plan.
Okay, thank you.
Patrick Stewart. Thanks, Dave. Sure. Good job.
I do. Patrick Stewart, S-T-U-A-R-T.
Rob handed out A9. Is that a summary of your educational and professional background?
Yes, it is.
Are you a registered landscape architect in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania?
Yes, I am.
Could you briefly describe your professional background?
Sure. I have a Bachelor of Science in Landscape Architecture from Temple University. I have a Master's of Science in Planning, Community and Regional Planning from Temple University as well.
I'd like to offer Patrick as an expert in landscape architecture, lighting, and site planning.
Without objection.
Patrick, are you familiar with the property
I am very familiar.
and the general area?
Yes, I am.
Has your firm been engaged to be the landscape architecture firm for this project?
Yes, we've been engaged to design the landscaping and the site lighting for the project.
And were you here to hear the prior testimony this evening?
Yes, I was.
Did your firm prepare the landscape and lighting plans? I believe they were at sheets 6 through 12 of the special exception plan set A5.
Yes, we did.
In your experience, do the landscaping plans get further reviewed by the Township Shade Tree Commission during the land development process?
Yes, they will be reviewed.
And just generally, how would you describe the existing landscape conditions of the property?
So the existing site is it's fairly wooded around the perimeter, and the sloped areas that you see on Mr. Lambert's plan that he put up. Some of the steeper sloped areas have some more mature oaks and tulip poplars. A lot of the trees have not been cared for over the years. They have some issues. We haven't thoroughly gone through and evaluated every single tree on the property yet, but I'm sure we will do that for the trees that are going to be impacted and the ones that we do want to save on the property.
And can you describe generally the objectives that you had in preparing the proposed landscaping plan at this point?
Sure. At this point in the process, we went through the ordinances, and your ordinances require parking lot landscaping, parking lot trees. The common service drive that services the property, we treated that as a street. Even though it's a drive, we put street trees along that per the ordinances. There are a number of buffers that we have put in, specifically to the north there. And there's also replacement trees under your ordinance. We've done some calculations. We've assumed all the trees that are coming down are healthy trees. We know that's not the case, but we were trying to be conservative. And we have a number, I think it's almost 300 replacement trees on the plan. The buffers, the street trees, the parking lots, the replacement trees, it's over 500 trees that are being shown on the plans right now.
You have up here on the table A7, the illustrious site plan, your firm prepared that plan?
Yes, we did.
And I don't know what makes sense, you tell me, to describe the proposed landscaping elements. Do you want to use this plan or the actual landscape plan?
We can use this illustrative plan, Exhibit A7.
So just go over at a high level, the elements of the proposed plan.
Sure. So along the service drive here, you'll see the circles are indicating the street trees that we've provided there. Parking lot trees within the parking lot areas here. Buffer along the northern property line where there wasn't as much existing vegetation. And then you'll see a series of trees with little circles, white circles around them. They're all the replacement trees, and we're trying to show that in a way. There's a lot of mature trees that will remain in these areas, and we thought the best to underplant them with some natives. So we're trying to show you how we're going to disperse the replacement trees throughout the project.
I believe in the PI ordinance, it said there should be a landscaping plan that contained the location, quantities, size, and types of the plantings. Do the landscape plans in the special exception set show all of that detail?
They do. They call out individual species, the caliper size, there's plant schedules, details on how they get planted, and then we have a compliance chart that shows the requirements in the SALDO in Chapter 263 of the ordinance for tree replacements in existing trees.
And those plans show compliance with the applicable provisions?
They do.
And Mr. Lambert mentioned it wasn't clear that a buffer was needed, but one is provided. Is that correct? The 20-foot buffer?
That's correct. There's a 20-foot buffer around the entire perimeter of the property, much of which there's mature existing trees that will remain in that area.
Mr. Lambert had testimony that some of the plan elements like service, utility, parking, storage, heating, ventilation, and air conditioning would be adequately screened. Do you agree with that opinion?
I agree with that. You know, right now there's a mature stand of trees in here that'll screen the parking. The replacement trees at this point in the process, we've proposed all native deciduous trees. I believe the ordinance allows you to use some evergreens, so when we go through planning and meet with the shade tree, we may elect to use some evergreens in some of those areas where it might be more effective than a deciduous tree for screening.
And there's a fairly significant distance to other properties, correct?
Correct, yeah.
And this A7 even shows some pretty heavy vegetation on some of the surrounding properties?
Correct, yeah. The heavy dash line around the buildings, that's 75 feet, so you can see, you know, there's mature stand of trees within that area that, you know, we're not anticipating touching.
As I mentioned before with Mr. Lambert, there were a couple code provisions in that general provisions we were going over that addressed lighting in the PI district. Did your firm prepare a lighting plan set, or lighting plans that are in the special exception plan set?
We did.
And they're at sheets 9 and 12 of Exhibit A5?
Correct.
In your experience, will the lighting plans be further reviewed by the township during the land development process?
Yes, they will.
Can you just briefly describe what's proposed for site lighting at this juncture?
So we looked at the ordinances, the service roads, the parking areas have to be illuminated per the ordinance, and the maximum height we can do is a 25-foot tall fixture. We went with something that's 14-foot more pedestrian scale. We thought that would be more appropriate for the project. And we have them coming along the service driveway and then along the parking areas as well.
So in your opinion, do these adequately illuminate the driveways and service areas?
They do.
That was 208-105D. 208-105E says that lighting should be directed so as not to create a nuisance or protect adjoining street and properties from direct glare or hazardous interference. Do the lighting plans comply with those requirements?
They do, and we have a photometric plan as part of that plan set, and we show foot candles on the ground, and we're 0 foot candles, 100 feet before we get to the property line in most cases. And the fixture that we selected is it's a dark sky fixture. It's a full cutoff, so you have no light pollution going up above the fixture. And we specifically selected a color temperature of 3,000 Kelvin, which is a warm. I'm sorry. We specifically selected a fixture that is a full cutoff fixture, and it has a color temperature of 3,000 Kelvin. So it's a warm light, so it's not a harsh, bright light like you would see in a shopping mall.
In your professional opinion, will the proposed plans have any greater detrimental impact on adjoining properties or the general public health, safety, and welfare than a typical similar development?
No, I do not.
That's all I have for Patrick.
Any questions from members of the board?
I just want to confirm, you said you're using dark sky fixtures?
Correct.
So that you've taken into consideration the observatory at Eastern University?
I didn't take into consideration the observatory, but the fixture that we looked at was, instead of going 25 feet, we thought stepping it down to a lower height and then using something that's full cutoff, dark sky, no light pollution would be appropriate.
Thank you.
We have one more witness, Chris Williams. Oh, I'm sorry.
Any other questions from the board? Thank you.
Sorry to jump the gun there.
That's okay.
Did you give him the CV too? Mr. Lambert's going to hand out A10, which is Chris Williams' CV, and A11, which is a traffic impact study.
I do. Certainly. Christopher, middle initial J, last name Williams. Williams, with an S.
Mr. Lambert has handed out A10. Is that a summary of your educational and professional background?
Yes, it is.
And can you briefly describe your educational and professional background?
Certainly. I have a bachelor's degree in civil engineering from the University of Delaware. In my career, I've worked in the field of transportation, engineering, and planning for 30 years. My project work largely consists of representing land use projects through the municipal review and approval process, as well as a large part of my work is representing municipalities as their traffic engineer, and in those situations, I'm reviewing applications from developers on behalf of the municipality.
And are you a licensed professional engineer in Pennsylvania?
Yes, I am.
I'd like to offer Chris as an expert in transportation engineering.
Without objection.
Mr. Williams, are you familiar with the application and the property that are the subject of this proceeding?
Yes, I am.
Have you familiarized yourself with the plans for this facility?
Yes, I have.
Did you hear the previous testimony at this hearing?
Yes.
Mr. Lambert handed out A11. Is this a traffic impact study that was prepared under your supervision?
Yes, it is.
Will this study also be reviewed by the township and the township traffic engineer during the land development process?
Yes, this study will be fully reviewed by the township during the land development process.
And what about PennDOT?
Yes, the study will also be fully reviewed by PennDOT as part of the highway occupancy permit process, being that Eagle Road is a state road.
And can you describe to the board what you did to prepare the study and what the conclusions are?
Certainly. So just by way of background, as part of the traffic study, we evaluate traffic conditions under 3 scenarios, those being existing conditions, secondly, future conditions due to normal expected traffic growth, but without the traffic from the subject development, and then third and lastly, we evaluate future traffic conditions with the added traffic from the subject development. We studied traffic conditions during the weekday morning commuter peak hour, the weekday afternoon commuter peak hour, and also the weekday midday peak hour. As part of the traffic study, we conducted traffic counts and studied at 3 locations, those being the existing access, the intersection of Eagle Road and Paul Road to the east of the site, and at the intersection of Eagle Road and Radnor Street Road to the west of the site. Also, as part of the study, we gathered speed data for traffic along Eagle Road in the vicinity of the site. Also, I'll mention that a key part of the traffic study is estimating the traffic that will be generated by the proposed use. In this case, and I've worked on several of these types of projects, in this case, a senior living development type use really is one of the best uses from a traffic standpoint, in that it generates very low levels of traffic, certainly during your commuter rush hour periods. So with that having been said, our estimates for the traffic to be generated by the site, first of all, it's based on actual data from other similar developments, and the data that we're relying upon is compiled and published by the Institute of Transportation Engineers. And with that data as our source, we found that the proposed development will generate approximately 42 trips during the weekday morning commuter peak hour, which is 15 entering and 27 exiting, approximately 69 trips during the weekday midday peak hour, which is approximately 35 entering and 34 exiting, and approximately 54 trips during the weekday afternoon commuter peak hour, which is 29 entering and 25 exiting. However, we also know, and it was testified to earlier this evening, at this site, it is proposed to provide a shuttle service to accommodate employee trips for travel to and from public transportation facilities, as well as for resident trips. And it's very possible that the actual trip estimates for this development may actually be less than the estimates that I've quoted. But we use those higher estimates in our traffic study. Furthermore, I just want to offer that by comparison, the traffic generated by this proposed senior living, senior residential land use is actually much less traffic than the traffic generating potential for the existing site if it were fully occupied, which we know it's not today, but if it were fully occupied as an educational institution. So the traffic that we would anticipate with this development is much less than what could occur today if the site were fully occupied. Just a couple more points. In traffic studies, we measure the performance of the road system and specifically intersections based on the amount of delay that's experienced at the intersection, and then we look at the added delay or the impact that's caused by the additional traffic from this development. What we found is that the studied intersections all operate at acceptable conditions, or what we call acceptable levels of service, and there is no change in the traffic conditions or the level of service with the added traffic from this development. Also, I want to note that we evaluated the available site distance for traffic entering and exiting the driveway. As this is a state road, we measured the available site distances and compared those values to PennDOT requirements. What we found is that some embankment regrading and vegetation clearing is needed along the edge of Eagle Road to the east of the site. And with this improvement, the available site distances are sufficient to comply with PennDOT's acceptable requirements, which frankly is not totally surprising since we're not proposing a new driveway, right? There's been a driveway at this location to serve this portion of the property for quite some time. We are proposing an improved driveway, but it's in generally the same location. So with the site distance improvements and with an improved driveway that will have to comply with all of PennDOT requirements, will include radius modifications and other details that we will get more into as we move through the process. So with those improvements, the driveway intersection with Eagle Road will operate safely and effectively for this development.
So you hit on the code section I mentioned before, 280-105B4. Streets, access ways be designed in a manner conducive to safe exit and entrance. That's the site distance analysis you spoke of?
Yes, correct. And with the proposed driveway improvements and the site distance improvements and with adequate site distance being available, yes, in my opinion, the driveway will allow for safe entrance and exit.
And 280-105C says that the streets in the vicinity should be adequate to serve if there were increases in traffic volume. Now, you said that compared to an educational use fully occupied, it might actually not be an increase, but assuming it was an increase along the numbers that you mentioned, did the level of service analysis that you did address that provision?
Yes, correct. Again, with the added traffic from this development, which as I mentioned, it is a very low traffic volume generator. With that added traffic, however, the intersections operate with unchanged conditions or unchanged levels of service. So we conclude the area street system can certainly accommodate the probable increases in traffic volume from this development.
In your professional opinion, would the proposed plan have any greater detrimental impacts from a traffic point of view on adjoining properties or the general public health, safety, and welfare than a typical similar development?
No, it will not.
That's all I have for Mr. Williams.
Any questions from members of the board? I just have one question. When you analyze increases or decreases in traffic absent the development, just some increase from what is currently present, how do you do that? And for instance, do you take into account, for instance, the development around the corner that will be adding 18 houses?
So good question. I didn't get into the details, but yes, the answer is yes. So when we project traffic into the future, and in this case, we're projecting traffic to the year 2025, there's two components to that. There's just sort of a general annual growth rate that we assume, just to account for just normal sort of regional growth that will occur. But when there are specific developments that are in close proximity, we will account for that specific development traffic as well. And we did account for that development that you're referring to.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions from the board?
Yeah, Chris, just to follow up on John's point. So there's two major development programs in this township, and they're both right across the street from one another. And you have to look at what's happening to that area of Wayne. We have 18 new houses coming in across the street. Let's say that's 4 people a house. Let's say it's 100 people. Your project, 295 beds, 55 staff members, 200 and some parking spots. I understand, I haven't, of course, have not had a chance to go through this in great detail, but it just, I cannot believe the conclusion that there's no detrimental impact to the traffic in that area of Wayne. You're talking about almost 450 additional human beings being put in a very small area. And the conclusion is there's no detrimental impact. That's what I find hard to understand.
So a couple of ways to respond to that. First of all, if we were to do nothing, and if the site were to repopulate and be fully occupied as an educational use, it is my opinion that the traffic that would be generated by the site would far exceed that which would be generated by a home for the aged. So I think from a comparison standpoint, we're looking at a use that generates less traffic than what could occur there today by right. In terms of your questions about the amount of traffic generated by the project, so we focus on the peak hour. So what's unique about this type of use, it's not this, so the people that live in these communities aren't driving as much as a traditional residential community. Now, the independent living units, they will generate some traffic. The residents that are in the personal care or the memory care, they're not driving, right? So that tends to be more employee traffic. And your employee traffic, the largest shift, as we heard today, is 7 a.m. to 3 p.m. Those folks are arriving to work 6:30 a.m. to 7 a.m. So they're outside of our traditional peak hours. So there is traffic being generated by during other hours of the day, but they don't fall within our peak 60 minutes that we're studying. We're looking at the peak commuter hour, which really is between 7 and 9 and between 4 and 6. And the reason we're focusing on those hours is because that's when traffic is heaviest on the external road system. So I'm not misleading you. Certainly the site will generate traffic, but it's not just generating traffic during our rush hours, it's generating traffic during other hours of the day. Another aspect of this use is different than a traditional residential use, a traditional single-family home or townhouse development. This use has sort of a midday peak in the middle of the day. The reason is the residents that live here, right, many of them may very well be retired. They don't have to travel during your morning rush hour or evening rush hour. So they're traveling at off-peak times of the day when traffic is not as busy on the surrounding road system. So again, I think it's the nature of the residents. Their travel patterns are a little bit different. They aren't traveling as much during your conventional rush hour periods. You have less vehicle ownership in these types of communities. I know from both professional experience and personal experience, my parents are of this age demographic. They live in Shannondale. They have one vehicle. They're not using it very often. So, you know, it's more indicative of just the behavior of the resident in this community. It would be a much different story if this were 200 units of single-family homes, but it's not in this case.
You're correct. I guess currently there's nobody up there, right?
There's some traffic being generated by the property, but very little.
But there's 26 houses there, and let's say it was fully being used by Valley Forge. 26 houses is a lot less than, what, 90 units?
It's 20, on the property today is about, I think, 24 or 26 homes and about 20,000 square feet of academic space plus outdoor recreational spaces.
Right.
So if that were all fully occupied, you could very easily put a K-8 private school back in here. You know, that type of use would generate more traffic during rush hour than this
I can only
would.
deal with what's in front of us.
Understood.
I can't talk. But,
Understood.
And I apologize if I missed it. Did you talk about what, if any, changes are going to be made to the entranceway on Eagle?
So in a very general sense, so we're not that far along in the detail. We need to go through land development. It will be reviewed by the township's traffic engineer and township staff. We need to apply to PennDOT for a highway occupancy permit. We will go through their review process. We anticipate improvements to the existing driveway, widening of the driveway, improved radii on the driveway to facilitate turning movements in and out, and probably most significantly is regrading and vegetation clearing along the frontage to improve sightlines. So that's some of what we anticipate at this time.
Do you anticipate a traffic light being put in?
No, it does not. This site would not warrant a traffic signal.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you.
Thanks.
Any other questions from the board? Thank you.
That's our case in chief. I would like to move the exhibits into the record and make a couple of closing remarks, if I could.
Without objection.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to a lot of testimony and taking in a lot of evidence. I think you know this, but just to put it out there, we're here just for a special exception. Special exception is an unfortunate name. It's not special, it's not an exception, but it's a form of a permitted use under the zoning law. And the idea behind a special exception is that when the commissioners allow a use by special exception in a zone, all the normal impacts that come with that are basically accepted and are accepted when they allow the use. So that's why I talked about did it have a greater impact than a typical development. The law basically is that if an applicant shows they meet the standards for the special exception, they're entitled to have the approval granted. We think that the testimony and plans we presented and other information showed that we met the specific standards. And, you know, as I said, this will come back to the township for land development review and also PennDOT review and also the NPDES permit. In addition to all of that legal stuff, you know, we think this is a very good plan, generally very good reuse of this site, and something that should be an asset to the community and something that is needed. So we hope that the board would look favorably upon our application. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any comment from members of the public? Ms. Pilling, come on up.
I did. Sarah, S-A-R-A, Pilling, P-I-L-L-I-N-G.
Good evening.
Good evening to you.
Thank you for your patience.
I came and sat through this tonight because I am not so sure I'll live long enough to go there. I'm not so sure of the price point that I would be able to. But I think a continuing care community is absolutely necessary for Radnor Township. In May of 2022, I will have lived in my little house on Garrett Avenue for 40 years. And it's incomprehensible to me that should I find a continuing care community or be able to afford it, that I would have to leave my community in order to find other living. My church is here, the pharmacy is here, the doctor is here. More importantly, my friends are here and the community is here. And I think this is something that is vital for this community. As I sat here and I listened to it, I thought, And another issue is that the real estate housing will begin to turn more. As seniors find that there is a good place to go, they'll be more inclined to give up the big old house, which will allow space for younger families to move in. So I can't see a negative to it. It looks like it's in its own space so much that except for the traffic, no one will really know they were there. And it's a wonderful feature for Radnor Township. I had a father who was at Waverly for 11 years. Finally, I snuck his car away from him because he kept getting dings, but he didn't drive that car more than once a week because the center of activity becomes within the community. And you only go out of the community when you have to go to the doctor, the dentist, the pharmacy. And I know from my dad living at Waverly that all the pharmaceuticals get brought to. There are businesses where all the prescriptions come in bottles or packets or by the day. There's none of that. It becomes a self-contained community. So I just wanted to say that because I have heard that, oh, we don't need this in Radnor. Yes, we do. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Pelling. Are there any other comments from members of the public? Okay, seeing none, I would move that the applicant be granted a special exception under section 280-68B on the basis of the plans and testimony that have been presented this evening. Is there a second?
Second.
Any board discussion?
Just that we're here tonight to discuss the special exception. A lot of the other questions that we have will come out during the SALDO process. And it's refreshing to have a life care facility come in front of us, not as a threat as we have in the past, where a developer wanted to do something and their threat was, if you don't approve this, I'll put a life care facility in. So to me, that's very refreshing. And absolutely, we've needed this. Many years ago when Valley Forge, the talk of its demise, in those days, the North Wayne residents came out in strong opposition to a proposed life care facility. So it's interesting to see how that appears to have changed.
Yeah, I liked everything I heard about this project, and I'm not suggesting it's not needed. However, I can't support the motion. I don't believe they've met the requirements under the zoning code for standards for special exceptions because of, in my opinion, the substantial detrimental effect it will have on that neighborhood, along with the other huge project directly across the street. And, we have to apply these standards. And yeah, it's great we need this thing, but there's standards to be satisfied. I don't believe they've been satisfied here.
Any other comments?
I respect everything that's been said. I've lived here for quite a long time, and over that period of time, one thing that seems to be happening is that the military academy, I don't think it's any big secret, is not the institution it was with the following that it had 50 years ago. I think the township is going to be well served, not just to bring in the plan that has been proposed here, and I think they've justified the grant of a motion, I'm sorry, not a motion, but a special exception. But I think it's also good that the township and that people come forth with ideas to develop this, what I think is an underutilized property, and almost a derelict property. When you walk, I live down the street, I live on Aberdeen Terrace, and if you walk through that area, I mean, not much is going on, and it's starting to deteriorate. They're selling properties off right and left. And I'm happy to see that this is the type of program that's coming in here and that we need, and it's anticipating the dissolution, I believe, of a rather large tract of property.
I'll be brief. I was impressed with the case that was put in front of us. I think it met every single requirement under our code, and in certain circumstances went above, I think, what we're, we expect to get. Usually we're, when you're requested to get a certain amount of parking spaces, it's amazing that it actually ends up on that number. You don't necessarily see times where they actually go over and above what they're required to do, even in the open space. So, I think they made the burden.
Any other comments? Okay, hearing none, I'll call the vote on the motion. Mr. John Nagel?
Aye.
Mr. Lord?
Aye.
Mr. George Nagel?
Opposed?
Mr. DeLazia?
Aye.
And I am in favor. The vote is 4-1. The relief is granted. And good luck with the next steps of the project. That concludes this evening's meeting. We will be back for Part 2 of October in November, namely November 15th. Thank you.